to the degree that you want something is the degree you're afraid of not having.
Yeah. God, I wish I started when I was younger. I go, well, yeah, but you didn't. So shut the fuck up and let's keep going.
Right.
Like you can't.
Nobody changes until they change their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. Because it's not till then that it's really real.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is way worse than I thought. It's like, oh yeah, it's way, way worse than you thought.
Yeah.
But luckily, there's more to you than you think.
Dr. Dave Rabin, good to have you here, brother.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, man.
It's been in the works for a while.
It has. It has. This is definitely overdue. And a topic that I'm really excited to talk about, and I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of different things, but ketamine therapy is something that I haven't got a chance to really talk to someone, deep in the work and really discuss what's going on, because it's a really interesting time, because not only is the therapeutic model, but there's a lot of people with nose sprays, and these nose sprays are being used sometimes recreationally, sometimes ceremonially. And, like a lot of these medicines, psilocybin, MDMA, this is just the nature of it when the legislation is lifted. In my opinion, doing overall far more good than detriment. But there are some, there are some issues that are concerning.
For sure.
But so let's just jump right into a general overview for those people who don't really understand what ketamine is, and then talk a little bit about how it's used therapeutically, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. That's a great place to start. Dive right into the K-hole, right?
Yeah, for sure. Why avoid it? Yeah. Never works out so well with these medicines.
So I, for those who don't know, so I'm a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist, and I study these medicines, and mostly focused on the mechanism of how they work in the body. And ketamine is really interesting because it is one of the most fully synthetic, commercially available, and only commercially available legal psychedelic medicines. So it is available for everyone to use legally by prescription, which is pretty interesting. And it's short acting. And it's been studied for probably over 70 years in people from, evacuating wounded soldiers from Vietnam through anesthetizing pregnant women, children, and horses that require very gentle anesthesia, because people who are in vulnerable states, like children, pregnant women, and horses, which are very sensitive animals, can react very badly to anesthesia. And that can have a lot of downstream negative effects. So ketamine actually became popular in the anesthetic world because it was so useful for these purposes.
Our kittens just were spayed and neutered, and they were given ketamine.
Oh, wow. Right.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And I was just connecting to their experience of what it must have been like as they were on this journey in the vet's office.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because it's something that a lot of people didn't understand for a long time. And to give you an idea, I'll tell you one of my favorite stories about ketamine. That my father-in-law is an anesthesiologist, and he was one of the first people to start using ketamine, back 50 years ago in the OR. And they were just bringing out ketamine and saying, and educating the doctors about how to use it, and saying, hey, here's an alternative anesthetic. Let's see, let's use it. It's been tested. We know it's safe for the most part. At that point, it was a long time ago. We're going to start using it in patients. Here are the protocols, and let's try it and see if it works better and has less side effects than some of the other anesthetics. So one of the first patients that he administered ketamine to, of course, this is at very high doses, much, much higher than we use for psychotherapy. And he gives the patient ketamine, the patient goes under, and this is in combination with other anesthetics for a big surgery. At the end of the surgery, the patient sits up, wakes up right out of it, and sits up straight out of the bed and looks right at him and says, I am the Lord Jesus Christ.
Like, oh, wow.
And he was like, I don't know if we're going to keep using this, guys. You can imagine how frightening an experience like that would be, not only probably the patient wasn't that frightened in the moment, but maybe a little confused, whereas the doctors were like, oh my God, what did we just give this guy?
Yeah.
And not knowing anything about, none of these people had experience with psychedelic medicines. LSD had just been around and then basically illegalized, within 20 years. And psilocybin was studied, but not really used that much, and wasn't used at all in therapy or by anesthesia or ER docs or in the hospital. All of this was foreign to these people. So they were like, psych consult, like, we need a psychiatrist here in stat.
The thing about that statement is if he would have just said, I am Jesus Christ and everyone else is too, then all of a sudden he goes from a crazy person to a mystic.
Right.
But unfortunately, he didn't say that. So he's in the crazy person
and
side of things.
That's an amazing point to switch over, because that is the whole idea of these medicines, is that they are teachers that require framework around them, which you've talked about, with Michael Pollan and with Luke, and the idea that, you can administer these medicines and they work really well in many contexts if they're just given alone. However, they can also amplify things that are not necessarily desirable. And I can't remember who came up with this description, but one of my favorite descriptions of psychedelics is as non-specific amplifiers to human experience.
Yeah, referring particularly to LSD as where they usually use that moniker. But yeah, it's
but any of them.
Any of them can be, yeah.
And so the experience, like basically what you bring into the experience, has a dramatic impact on what you get out of said experience.
Right.
Which oftentimes we call intention and preparation around intentions, where you're focusing your human energy and your attention when you go into a potentially transformative experience that you're going to have, which is really the brilliance of psychedelic medicines, specifically the drugs, because they allow us to administer ketamine, as one example, for a 3-hour period where we know you're going to be in an altered state of consciousness. We know roughly what that's like because we have ourselves used it in our own training because it's legal. And we can guide you through it because we know where you're going to be for that half an hour, hour and a half. And it becomes effectively a catalyst. Going back to something we were talking about a few minutes ago, it's basically a catalyst for a natural experience of transformation that we all have the ability to access at any time. But there's been a narrative playing in our minds that we may not even be aware of, that is the narrative by which we live our lives. And until you press pause on that narrative and come back to balance and homeostasis and say, wait a minute, this is who I am. I am me. The experiences I've had are important, but they're not who I am. They don't define me. They teach me. And this experience, similarly, is also a teacher. And what it's teaching me is that I have the ability to heal myself. And that's how we frame ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, but ideally all psychotherapy, to make sure that people get as much out of it as possible and don't become dependent on the medicine.
Right. As far as mechanism of action, I was reading Jamie Wheel's book, Recapture the Rapture. I had him on the podcast. Great book.
I was just hanging out with him before this.
Oh, nice. Beautiful. He was talking about how ketamine, as well as nitrous does it in the most extreme way, but ketamine drops your brainwave state into a pretty low delta. And this is kind of curious as far as a mechanism of action, because it seems like those things, nitrous, ketamine, they give you access to this kind of void state, and I think that obviously correlates to what's happening in your brainwave state. Is in that delta we experience in the deep dreamless sleep, which is like a void state. And then if we get to it in a waking state, it's also in this kind of interesting void state. Now, that's not to say that visions won't appear or things won't happen in the void, but it's very interesting how that creates this kind of reset for the body, as well as the material that you're able to work through, but also almost the inaccessibility of the memories and the things. Like, it's very slippery when you're in that deep in the ketamine. I mean, there's so many times where I've been in a journey and been like, I fucking figured it out.
Right.
You're welcome, everybody. I figured it out. And then I come out of it and I'm like, and then I'm pretty sure I figured it out.
Right.
But I don't know how.
Yeah. And it's ineffable. It's like hard to verbalize and put into words. And to some extent, we haven't necessarily been taught the vocabulary to be able to effectively describe these experiences, right? Which is why the education around these experiences is so critical, because you give people the words to be able to take with them what they feel and what they learn and experience, and then integrate those words into the new narrative of how you want your life to be by knowing who you actually are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So what do you think
But the mechanism, I was just going to say the mechanism, because I don't want to ignore your question.
Yeah.
The mechanism of ketamine is really interesting. It's also really complex. And I think to say that it's entirely based on getting into this delta wave state is not the whole story, because there's so much other stuff going on, right? And ketamine, for instance, activates a ton of different receptors in the brain, more than a lot of the other psychedelics, which typically, like, we think of as activating the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor pathway,
Sure.
which is involved in shifting meaning. Ketamine seems to do the same thing in terms of shifting our sense of meaning that we make from ourselves and from our experience, but it also activates all these other receptors, and it's an anesthetic. So to your point about it, the experience is being slippery, it's not just because we don't have the words, it's also because it's numbing to some extent to our mind-body association, which is why we call it a dissociative substance. And so that makes it literally harder to take things out of it, because it is anesthetizing. It decreases sensitivity, right? So other psychedelics don't always do that, but there are really great uses for anesthetizing somebody a little teensy bit during a psychedelic experience. So somebody who's had very severe trauma, for instance, typically will respond really well to a medicine that takes the edge off the pain and the suffering and the shame and the guilt that might typically accompany the recollection of traumatic memories and experiences.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily going to get that soft, gentle, handheld experience when you're walking somebody through a psilocybin experience, right? It might throw their trauma in their face, and it might give them the physiological response of actually being there, which can also be therapeutic. It's just not necessarily as pleasant and comfortable and easy for people to access. And so oftentimes we recommend ketamine as a opportunity for people who have never had psychedelic medicine before, to kind of get their feet wet in what an altered state of consciousness is like, because it's only an hour and a half. It's really safe. If you use it at the doses for therapy, people, over a very short amount of time, people don't have side effects of any significant degree. And they do get some of the long-term benefits of persistent integration, helping basically take what you learn from the medicine and making it part of your life. So it has a lot of advantages that can, when MDMA and psilocybin become legal in 2023, we'll be able to bridge that gap for people and get them into the more in-depth work if they need it.
I was speaking with Michael and Annie Midhofer, who are doing...
They're lovely.
Yeah, they're lovely. And they're deep in the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy world. And let me, I'm going to be summarizing what they're saying, and they obviously had a bit more nuance in that. But they were explaining that MDMA's value in helping people process trauma is it allows you to access those memories, whether it's sexual abuse or some traumatic event or some, something that's generating that PTSD or just general non-specific trauma that you have, but access it. But because of the serotonergic qualities and all of the incredible feeling that's in your body, you're actually rewriting the negative emotions that are usually brought up when you access that memory and overriding them with the positive feeling that you have and the trust that you have from the medicine. And so it's almost like a floppy disk that's getting overwritten. While the memory is the same, the emotional signature changes. And then they explain that ketamine is doing something similar in that it's allowing you to access those memories, but with a neutral emotional signature. So it may not be overriding it with love and safety and all of these things that MDMA is doing, but it's helping you rewrite it, access it without the pain. And so it allows you to go through it, take a look at it, and start to rewrite some of that really painful emotional signature, which makes the memories traumatic, which then causes the brain to wall it off. And then it becomes that little demon in your psyche behind bars, basically, that's starting to subconsciously control your actions and behaviors. Is that kind of does that make sense in a description? And how would you kind of add on to that analysis?
I think that's a great metaphor. And just to put it out there, Mike and Annie Midhofer trained me in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and they are just incredible mentors, and their work is really inspiring. And they they pioneer the MAPS MDMA phase 3 protocol for doing psychotherapy with MDMA for people with severe PTSD. And Phil Wolfson, who is the leader in the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy world, helped co-develop the MAP psychotherapy protocol with MDMA for people with severe medical illnesses, which is really interesting. And so they all work together on the protocols together, which is why the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy protocol, for all intents and purposes, is so similar to the MDMA-assisted protocol. So I think that there's, to throw an additional caveat in there about the way that these kinds of things work. It's the language at the core of how we describe ourselves and how we describe the world around us, which is based mostly on what we've been taught and who we've seen growing up talk about the world. We internalize that like sponges, especially as children. And the emotional words, the emotional context of experience that we have growing up, and the way people judge those as either good or bad, rather than just, hey, this was an experience you had, right? Let's see how this unfolds. We don't necessarily know whether it's good or bad while it's happening, but we can think about it as what it is, and then later come back to it when we're feeling safe and comfortable, and then judge it or appraise it rather, and think about, what does this actually mean in my life? Maybe it's not good or bad. Maybe it's good and bad, which it turns out most things usually are a little bit good and a little bit bad.
Yeah, it's hard to find something that isn't a little bit of both.
Right. And so what I was talking about, actually, you probably know Rachel Yehuda, who did a lot of the epigenetics work, who runs the psychedelic and trauma department at Sinai. She and I were talking the other day about how she's one of the world's leading trauma experts, who discovered that people with PTSD who experience trauma have changes in the epigenetic code that regulates gene expression of stress response genes and probably reward response genes, which condition the amygdala, right? So the amygdala being the fear and reward center, or what we think of as often the fear center of the brain, connects directly to the emotional center of the brain, which then tells us what to do based on the fear actions, and it basically detects familiarity versus unfamiliarity. And so trauma is something that you don't even know you've had until you have a chance to appraise it in the future tense, looking back, right? So we often think of having an experience and we're like, oh my God, that experience just traumatized me, right? But then you've actually traumatized yourself by labeling it as trauma. So the experience is the experience. Trauma is a judgment of that experience.
Which then reinforces what happens in the experience. Because you're certainly awash with whatever neurochemical cocktail happens for the adrenaline, noradrenaline, the whatever comes at the moment of terror, or at the moment of, whatever that is, that is real.
Right.
To a certain extent.
Absolutely.
But then what ends up happening is the way that we look at it then decides how much that sinks in, so to speak.
How
much
it gets recorded. Right. Not how necessarily how much it sinks in, but when it sinks in, what does it get associated with? Is it associated with emotions of awe, or is it associated with emotions of great shame and guilt and sadness, or is it associated with emotions of fear and disgust or joy, or just a mix of a whole bunch of stuff that we haven't necessarily figured out yet because it's so complex, right? And we sometimes jump to the first one, which is fear. And it's okay to be afraid, especially if you're afraid in a situation where your survival isn't threatened, and hopefully your personal rights aren't threatened. Fear is a very important signal to us. But when we judge it, we actually change the way that we think about it. So to not go too much on a segue here, the reason why this ties back to the great explanation that you gave about sort of the similarity between ketamine and MDMA and how they work is that they take the edge off that fear, because that fear gets recorded in the amygdala, and between the amygdala and the emotional cortex, and then between there and the hypothalamus, which governs all of our body's reactions like racing heart rate, increased blood pressure, and vasoconstriction, and sweating, and all the other things that happen when we get stressed out and afraid. That gets recorded into a memory loop, which is a neural network that's functioning because it perceives that we are under survival threat. So when you take the edge off of that biochemically with MDMA or ketamine, especially for people who can't do it with therapy alone, you're giving them a chemical assistant, basically, that says, for this period of time, you're going to have the opportunity to go back and reappraise, almost like the cartoons. You remember Looney Tunes when we were kids? And then you'd have a character would die and their ghost would go up to heaven, and St. Peter would come down and be like, we're going to go back and look at your whole life how you got to this moment.
Yeah.
That is it. That is what the medicines are doing. But literally within our memory and within the epigenetic code and the way that our neurons talk to each other. And then that allows the rewiring to happen by remembering those experiences from a standpoint of safety and relieving them of the judgment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I've seen that happen. I've seen people go and find the gratitude in even a horrific event. And when they reach the gratitude, they've re-encoded that thing with not, okay, yes, it might have been really tough, but it gave me these X superpowers.
Exactly.
Like I became an incredibly successful entrepreneur. I became an incredibly successful athlete because I was trying to feel safe, and my power and my money made me feel safe. But now I have this huge platform, and now I can do so much good in the world. And without that, who knows what I would have done? Maybe I would have been, worked in an ice cream shop, like whatever, right?
Right.
So, and I've literally seen that happen. I've been blessed to be in the room during some of these MDMA assisted psychotherapy sessions. And so, but the re-encoding of the memory is so interesting because it reminded me. So I had a girlfriend from Australia who moved out here with me when I'm fresh out of college, and her name was Angie. And we went down to San Antonio, and San Antonio has this like Ripley's, believe it or not, House of Horror. And they do a damn good job. Live actors, and it's Ripley's, and it's like they crush it. I mean, I don't know if it's still there or not, but anyways, we were going. It's middle of the day, we're sober, middle of the day, and we're going through this thing. And as soon as we get to the first room, and the way it's set up is as soon as you enter the first room, it's a seamless door. So there's no going back. There's only going forward. And there was like bodies hanging from meat lockers, and they're swinging around, and lights are flashing, and the music is scary. And then there's real people weaving through.
Yep.
And she has a hysterical breakdown, goes up, curls up in the fetal position, and is like yelling. And I'm like, oh dear, we just started this, right? I'm like, listen, it's not real. It's not real. Don't worry about it. It's not real. And she's like, just having a full panic attack. And I was like, all right, the only way out is forward. No one's coming to save us here. They don't care. They're probably watching this on a camera somewhere, loving it.
That's a good metaphor for life right there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, I have her on my back, and she's so scared that she doesn't want to touch anything. So she's keeping her legs straight down. So she's not even wrapping them around me. So I'm just like holding onto her in the most uncomfortable way, getting choked, and her hands are like, her feet are straight down, and we're going through. And meanwhile, we go from room to room. I'm like stumbling into the exit. The bodies are swinging in the first room and banging into us. And she's yelling, like screaming every time it happens. And we make our way through. I'm fumbling around and all these things. And there's all of these live actors that continue to scare us. And I'm looking at them like, come on, bro. Can you not see? Like, we're just trying to make it through this. Right. And then we go to this room where the whole room is like a tube, and it's spinning, and I'm trying to walk on this bridge, and it's incredibly disorienting.
Like American Gladiator.
Yeah. So I'm like running into the rails, and she's yelling and screaming. Finally, like 20 minutes later, we make it through. She had peed on me at some point during the whole process. I was like soaked down my back. We get to the final elevator, and it's like the live actors could smell blood. It was like their favorite part of the day. And one tries to like come into the elevator on the way. It's like for one final scare. And she rips off, she had high heels on at the time. She liked high heels. He rips off a high heel and goes to swipe right at his eyes. And I just grab her stomach in time to like push her back. And she like barely misses this guy. I'm like, we got to get out of here. Anyways, we get out into the daylight. She takes some breaths. And the funny thing is, like, within, an hour, a day, a week, a month, it was all laughter about that thing. So while that experience had the emotional signature of something that was legitimately as terrifying as she'd probably been in her whole life, her memory and coding of it was, well, that was funny because it wasn't actually dangerous. So there wasn't any fear. So I would venture to say that there is zero trauma that was created from that experience. But I've never really made that connection about how important it is what we label something.
Yep.
And also why, so much of the sexual trauma is so difficult because it's so enshrouded in shame.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like I felt pleasure from this thing, and then shame just compacts it and, makes it so, so heavy and so deeply rooted. And it's really interesting to think about how that works in the brain and how much power we have to re-encode something if we can see from the right perspective. And of course, these medicines certainly help us to get to that perspective, but it's the re-encoding that's really doing so much of the work.
Absolutely. And the re-encoding is, and that's a great story. And we actually, because of people's experiences like that, I don't know, did she have, I meant to ask, did she have any experiences after leaving where she felt more calm than she did, or that you notice any kind of more a sense of more relaxation or lower fear threshold after than she did before she walked in?
I think like in a way, because in a way, like there was, in a way, she was like a fuck no to a scary moment, but it was always with a smile. It's like, I'm not doing this, and in a way there was a kind of ease around it, where before there was this like curiosity and this idea of like, maybe I should, maybe it'll be this. And she's like, no, I'm not doing this. Like, and it was just, but there was a sense of ease about these different situations where before there was a sense of unknown and this slight allure, but slight fear and slight all of this. And that created tension, I would say, when a scary thing would come up. Whereas this point, she understood her boundaries. She's like, I am not interested in that thing again, and I'm all good with that. And so there was a sense of ease, I would say, that came from it. But I wasn't paying attention to other cues, like the question that you're potentially asking me.
Well, the reason why I ask is because there's been a theory for a long time in the cognitive neuropsychology world that we all have like a fear set point that is based on any number of experiences that have led up to this point in our lives that kind of is a threshold basically for when our sympathetic nervous system starts to really kick on and be like, you should worry about survival right now, right? And one of my colleagues who co-invented the technology behind Apollo with me at the University of Pittsburgh decided to explore this because he loved to explore really interesting phenomena. And so he ended up co-creating a haunted house that was one of the top 10 scariest haunted houses in America, similar to what you're talking about. Yep. Very similar, except, it was probably very similar because it had live actors that would interact with you and put a hood over your head and separate you from your partner. And it was like, wow, it was really crazy.
They're going for it.
It was out of control. And what they would do is they'd measure people's responses to threatening images and sounds and things like that using EEG brainwave assessments and EKG cardiac assessments before they went into the haunted house. And after they left, and they'd gone through all these terrifying experiences, and what they found was that the fear response was very much downregulated after they went through because they had an opportunity to experience something that objectively is extremely frightening, except they weren't at an actual danger risk. And so the theory was that if you can, which is similar to, in some cases, what we do with cognitive behavioral therapy with exposure, but way more relaxed.
Exposure and response therapy.
Right, ERP. Where you expose somebody in a very gentle way to things that would trigger them or set them off in an extremely safe environment. And then they have the opportunity to reflect on that internally, sometimes externally in conversation with a therapist or in journaling. And they realize that they can be safe around something that used to really, really terrify them. And all of a sudden, you start the rewiring process naturally. Right. And it's the idea of like holding a child's hand when they're afraid of the dark, and walking them through a place, or swaddling a baby or something like that. It's the same idea because that touch from a parent or a loved one that they trust instantly sends safety signals to their brain that says, you don't actually need to be afraid right now. And sometimes they're still afraid in the moment, but when they get out, they have the opportunity to reappraise. And then as they think about it more, it actually retrains their neural networks to be more functionally helpful rather than to just react in a kind of a mixed up way where, they're not sure what they're afraid of, but little things can set you off at any moment.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing.
One of the most pervasive fears that all of us have, of course, is the fear of death.
Sure.
And the fear of the unknown that happens on the other side of death. Because, as you said, there's the known and then there's the unknown. That's what the amygdala is really looking for. And the ultimate unknown is the death, unless you've experientially explored to a degree where you actually feel like you have an idea of what that's like. And ketamine is one of those medicines that can bring you to a place where you are simply the void. And you are a perspective within the void. You maintain a perspective in the void, but
which is also kind of unique.
It is pretty unique.
Medicines.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. Like, I don't know any other void medicine like that. Right? Everything else is so rich. Even 5-MeO-DMT. It's unicity, but it's so full of, sensory information. I mean, indescribably so, right? That's why you describe it as love, capital L, love, or God, because you can't describe what it is. But nonetheless, for me...
And you lose your sense of self.
You do lose your... It's just, you're in the oneness. ketamine can bring you to the oneness close to that, but you also maintain perspective in a unique way. But I think that can also help reprogram our fear of death and fear of the unknown. Like, what is it like when I lose my body, lose myself, and I'm simply a perspective, one window through the capital M mind of source or God or whatever your language permits. But I can imagine how that, for anybody, even people who don't have trauma-based fear, this universal fear, the fear of death, experiencing something where you go deep on a ketamine journey like this and realize, like, okay, that's not so bad. I was pretty good in there.
Yeah.
That was all right. I mean, I love coffee and hugs and sex, and I'm happy I have a body, but that other thing was cool too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really great point. I think that ketamine is really interesting in that way, in that it brings you into this space of consciousness where you have a lot of agency still. And I've known people who have literally, just by thinking about it, pull themselves out of that void, which is really, really interesting, because I think it goes to show the true power of the body and the mind, and that, we actually have the ability to change the way we're responding to a psychoactive substance in real time and completely negate the effects. Like, that's pretty wild. And people think of mind power, right? You're changing the way that your body is responding to a chemical in nearly real time. Yeah. And but that space that ketamine brings you to is really, it's a space that is, so some people do get into this void space, but then the void, what's interesting about the void that the void is not, it at first appears as nothing, right? It appears as a void, empty. And then you realize, what's the void? It's also everything.
One and the same.
Right.
It's pregnant with every single possibility.
Right. And so that recognition only comes when you ask the questions, right? What is this that I'm experiencing? Not necessarily trying to analyze it or say how, think about the how or the why or all those really complicated questions, but just the what of, what is this space? What am I feeling right now? And what happens is, in those situations, your body answers, or your intuition, or as Maps calls, your inner healer, whatever it is that you want to think of it as. There's a part of you that is familiar with this space, that helps to respond and answer back to you with what it is you need to know about the space you're in and how to navigate it. One of the most interesting insights that I ever had from ketamine, which was actually during an experience with Phil Wolfson, was the single phrase of, everything is as it should be. And we spend so much time thinking about how we wish things were.
Yeah, sure.
And I spend so much time thinking about how I need to be more patient, and I shouldn't rush things, because when I rush, I make mistakes. And I thought about that how many thousands of times, and I still rush, and I still make mistakes, and I still am impatient, and I still do the same stuff over and over again. And then I have this one experience where all of a sudden the insight is just crystal clear, right? Everything is as it should be. Everything will unfold as it will. And when you recognize that and you actually internalize what that means, it means that our goal is to follow our path, right? To find our path and to follow our path. That's the meaning of life, right? It's not that much more complicated than that. If everything is as it should be in this void space and in the everything space, which are connected intimately, then our goal is to figure out what our potential is as human beings, right? Yeah. What are we actually capable of in this, what some people call the meat suit, in this meat suit life, right? What is it we're capable of? And I think one of the biggest fallacies of Western education that I thought really did not serve me well personally, and also many of my clients, is the idea that you're supposed to know who you are. Who the fuck knows who they are?
Yeah, because where's the beginning and where's the end? Especially when you experience yourself as void.
Right.
And you're like, okay, I mean, I'm everything and nothing and something. particularly.
Well, even
you know?
even outside the ketamine experience, though, how are you supposed to know who you are? I feel like it's even more complicated outside of the experience.
Right.
Inside of it, you're like, okay, I'm this ball of energy, and I'm in this body right now, and that seems pretty clear. But because I can't,
And that's where it's simple.
yeah, right. That's where it gets really simple. But then when you think about like as one example that you brought up earlier of an experience that you would never be grateful for in the moment. For me, it was being bullied in school, right? Like I was a little different than the other kids. I had different interests than the other kids. And having those experiences as a child, were very painful. I would have feeling excluded from the social group, your social circle, and the community around you, just because you might talk or think about things a different way or whatever. I mean, that's really, really hard for kids. And how many kids go through that and have that pain? Now it might be more common than it was when we were kids because of cyberbullying. And I would have never expressed gratitude for that in the moment. And yet now, after I see, and I'm not saying that, I would say that we need to firmly do everything we can to, encourage sharing and empathy and eliminate bullying. But I can say firmly now that because I went through that, even though as painful as it was at the time, it helped me to ask the harder questions about myself and what makes me different. What is it that makes me who I am? What am I capable of that maybe these other people were incapable of seeing when we were children? Mm-hmm. What makes me special that made me stand out, right? And maybe that's something to embrace rather than to shun, because it's just who I am. I can't change what I was given when at birth. All I can do is make the most of it. Like Tolkien says, right? All we can do is make the most of the time that was given to us. Mm. And so the best way you can make the most of the time that's given to you is to embrace the unknown. The unknown is everything. The known is like less than 1% of everything.
Yeah.
The unknown is everything. So if we only embrace the known and we alienate the unknown, then we literally trap ourselves in a box of extremely limited dogmatic consciousness that is not at all accurate to what the whole really is. And so this is a lot of the work we do with our clients is to help people understand that when they have PTSD, they feel totally unable to do anything to change their outcome. They feel powerless. They feel disconnected from themselves and from the community. They feel ashamed of what they're experiencing and totally out of control. And just thinking about all of that is so difficult. And so, their certainty is that I know that this is me, right? So it's a self-reinforcing narrative. And so what we teach them is actually, you may not know who you are. Can you accept that it's possible that you may not know?
Because who you are is always changing. It's like Heraclitus has one of my favorite quotes of all time. No man steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man.
It's a great quote.
You can never pin down yourself, because the one who's pinning down the self is then different than the one who's being pinned.
It's just like quantum theory, right?
It's impossible. It gets fractal and it'll bend your mind when you try to actually decide. I was been trying to write a book called Master Your Mind. And then I eventually recognized that the inherent challenge of trying to figure out who is the one that's mastering the mind that is not the mind, and then going in this loop. And then ultimately I came to a resolution in how to actually explain this, which is to admit the challenge, the impossibility of even that phrase, right? Like telling to somebody to do that, because everything is always shifting, and the one mastering is also needing to be mastered. And this goes in this infinite loop. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, like recognizing that it can give us freedom. And then what we realize is that we're a proclivity. We're just a proclivity based on conditioning, based on the neural pathways that have been formed, based on the upregulation and downregulation of our epigenetic triggers and all of these different things. We're a proclivity. But then you listen to someone who's like in some ways, a modern day mystic, like Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he's saying like, yeah, this thing called the placebo effect that we've shown can actually change things.
Very real.
Very real. Don't need a pill. We can actually access that ourselves, and then start to, in his language, he wrote a book called the same thing, break the habit of being yourself, right? Like break through these patterns. And it's not easy. It's heavy
Right.
sledding because these grooves are carved deep.
Right.
But you can, with enough
There's
diligence.
no fresh powder on those slopes.
No, exactly. You can with enough diligence and enough, concerted effort. And, his method, for those people who are familiar or unfamiliar, he brings people to a deep meditative state. And he's very, he's a gifted guided meditation teacher, I would say.
Yeah.
And then from there, you start to manifest change from this place of what he will actually call the void. And we've used that word before. You enter the blackness, the void, where, you are no one and no thing at that point. And from there, you can bring in a new reality. I've actually paired ketamine with his guidance, and it's like really superpowering it. Now, all props to the meditative method, and it can absolutely get you to all of these places.
For sure.
There's no place that meditation, when mastered, can't get you to. And I acknowledge that, and I honor that path. And I think it's a very sacred way.
It's also very challenging.
A very challenging way. But if you really want to start making some hay, so to speak, like allowing yourself to enter the void with some assistance, because maybe you don't have the time to experience the meditation to that level because you need to be the change for a little
Right.
bit first to be the one who would meditate. But the ketamine can actually really help with that. And I've drawn in some change into my life, into my health, into real kind of interesting things where it felt like I had a golden thread to a possibility for myself. And I enter the void and I get to wrap my hands around this golden thread and I pull a potential reality in towards me. And I don't think I would ever been able to really get my hands on that golden thread to pull that potential reality from the quantum realm of all things that are possible without the help of ketamine.
It's a wonderful metaphor for the experience. You can. Ketamine is so if ketamine allows us to press pause on the tape that's been running in our minds as another metaphor, and allow us to experience the void, because the void can also be thought of as the absence of that narrative, right? So if you imagine you have this tape running in the back of our minds all the time that is who we've been taught to be. And then you have an opportunity, you press pause on that, you enter this void state that allows you to recognize all the infinite possibilities that the unknown contains and what we could potentially do with that. And that could be really overwhelming for people at first when they've been running the same tape for decades or, forever, for as long as they can remember. MDMA and psilocybin in some ways, and LSD and ayahuasca, when used properly, with respect in a careful therapeutic context, can provide sort of, I would say, almost another level. Ketamine can do it too, but the other metaphor to pausing the tape is also the metaphor of the ski runs that you were talking about earlier, in that when you have a tape running over and over and over again, you're literally skiing on the same runs over and over and over again, or and scraping more and more snow off and tightening the groove and making those neural networks even stronger. And I think this is one of the most incredible insights that Eric Kandel lent to us, who won the Nobel Prize in 2002 for discovering the origins of learning and memory, which date back not just through humans and not just through great apes, but through ancient sea snails that are 300 million years old. And they are forming memories with their 12,000 neurons the same way that we're forming memories with our 100 billion neurons, right? And that's amazing. They're using even the same chemicals, the same neurotransmitters in slightly different ways, but the outcome is the same. And so the moral of that story is that Eric Kandel, helped us understand is that practice makes perfect. You practice doing anything, you strengthen those neural networks in all ways. You strengthen the way the neurons grow to connect, and then you strengthen the way they talk to each other. And all of that gets compounded over time. And that's for all things we consider bad, things we consider good, and things we consider neutral. All things get stronger in this way, which is a really empowering idea, because it allows you to recognize that if you can understand that old habits aren't serving you, then you can equally understand that you can replace an old habit with a new habit, even though the old path is already carved and easier to follow, right? It's always easier to ski down the slope that is already been skied down. It's always easier to follow somebody else's tracks. It's harder and is a lot more, energy intensive to ski down 8 feet of fresh powder dropped on top of you,
Sure.
which is what a lot of the psychedelic medicines are kind of similar to. You know, you're taking this medicine and then all of a sudden the same parts of your neural pathways in your brain are active, but they're all free to talk to each other in any way they want. And then you have the opportunity to rewrite that path in that moment and then integrate it even further afterwards by pulling as much as you can from your subconscious, as you said, like on the golden thread, right? You have an opportunity to pull things that are aligned with your intention and your goals closer to you, and then manifest those in your life, which is one of the definitions of the word psychedelic, which is mind manifesting.
Mm.
And psyche means mind, and delos means to show. So it's to show us the mind that we weren't necessarily able to see, all of that stuff going on beneath our awareness. You look at that, and then you can pull whatever it is you want closer to you, knowing that it's all always there.
Yeah. And every time you do it, it gets a little easier.
Right.
The first track might be the hardest, and having some support through these medicines to make those first tracks. But then, that's an important part of the integration practice, is continuing to ski down those same tracks and make them a little deeper and make them a little deeper. And the longer you do that, eventually that can become this thing that you'll naturally fall into. And that's such an important thing for people to think about, is the very first time you do something, it's going to be the hardest. Every single time after that, it's going to be easier. Your first cold plunge, the hardest one.
And that's with every single thing.
That's with everything. Yeah, exactly.
Every single thing is harder the first time.
Yeah. So opening your heart, the very first time you really open your heart and really allow yourself to feel love, not just talk about love, not talk about desire, but feel love. All right, well, that may be the hardest to get to, but then once you're there, you can pattern that more and more, and love becomes easier, and opening your heart becomes easier. Forgiveness becomes easier. All of these things, Don Miguel Ruiz says that practice makes the master, and with everything.
The 4 agreements.
That's it. Yeah. And mastery of love. And it's a really kind of empowering message to say that whatever you have going on, whatever you're experiencing, there's a deep challenge to get out of that groove, but you can. And once you do it, the first time is going to be the hardest, but the next time will be a little easier. The next time will be a little easier. Then all of a sudden you're a different version of yourself, because the patterns and your proclivities and your natural, baseline state is just going to be in a different way.
Right. And that's the whole goal. The whole point is that process.
Yeah.
It is to recognize that we've gotten to this point so that we can make an actual decision about, is this point where I want to be?
Yeah.
Right? There's an entire section of our brain that is all of us that is dedicated to introspection, looking inside ourselves with a critical, self-reflective eye. Right? Self-inquiry. There's an entire part of a stripe in our insula called the middle insulate cortex that is dedicated to inquiry, self-inquiry. That means that we're supposed to be doing it, guys. Like, we're supposed to be reappraising. Same with empathy. And what's really fascinating is when you look at the neurobiology of how this emotional part of our brain evolved, which facilitates communal engagement and the building of all this crazy stuff around us and these complex societies, it can be, for the most part, localized to this insulate cortex, and surrounding the middle insula where introspection, self-inquiry lies, is the posterior insula, which is feeling our bodies. So feeling your heartbeat, feeling things touching your skin, the emotional context around that, feeling your lungs breathe and fill with air, being, aware, body scanning, and just being aware of your body and its sensations and your internal organs. And then on the anterior side, which is called the anterior insula, is a section that is entirely responsible for empathy, feeling what others feel, right? So if we evolved, and you can trace the evolution back through all these different animals and see that, as you follow monkeys through their evolution, that this part of the brain gradually expanded over time to serve the purpose of communality, it seems very clear that we all have the ability to do this. So if you don't use that ability, and we're not teaching people to use that ability, then in a lot of ways, we're missing the whole emotional component of the experience we're having. We're like handing the keys to the Maserati over to someone else, the Maserati of our lives, and just being like, hey, you can drive. I'm just going to sit here with a blindfold on and let you take me wherever you want to go and not give you any instructions.
Right.
And who would do that with their fanciest car, right?
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, there's, structures and entities that have taken advantage of the disempowerment of people.
Exactly.
And they say, oh, you're broken. You just got a broken brain. And you get these chemical imbalance theories and all these things. And you get these pills that, from a prescription bottle that say, okay, you just take this for the rest of your life and you'll be good. Well, that's starting to be exposed as not actually working. And there's, not to go down that whole rabbit hole, but there's a lot of money made off the disempowering of people and allowing people to say, I'm broken. I have this broken thing. I'll just get this solution. Like we're a computer that has a missing piece and you just plug this thing in. But we're not. We're like this amazing, miraculous being that can really change and has the power to do it. We just need the guidance.
Right.
And also that message of empowerment to do it. And I think a lot of people have so much self-judgment that it's actually hard to receive that message. Because when you receive that message, then you can say, you mean I could have been doing this all along? And then you have to look back at decades of your life where you were stuck in this other pattern and not believing you had the power and been like, you mean I could have gone through my whole 20s and 30s when I was young and sexy and I could have had this same thing? You're like, no, I do not want to believe this reality.
Right.
But the past is gone.
Because that also goes along with shame and guilt,
of
right?
course.
Of not doing it sooner.
Yeah. The past is gone.
Yeah.
We have now. We have now and forward from now and now and now and now and now and now.
Right.
So like let all that go. Like it's all good. You didn't know, you weren't ready. You were doing your best. Like allow that to be the past and not try to bring it forward, into this future reality. Like, so what? Like literally, so what?
Yeah. So what? And let's learn from it.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think we focus a lot on the past as defining us. Going back to what we were talking a little bit about earlier, we use it as an excuse to be who we are.
Yeah.
It's not an excuse. It's a teacher. Experience is a teacher. So if we look at the past as an opportunity to learn from what we've done, learn about what's serving us, what's not serving us, and then we can take little nuggets from that about and to help us understand who we are and where we actually want to go, right? We can't change the past. We can only change how we see it. And we can't change the future. We're actually notoriously terrible at predicting the future and changing it in the way that we typically think about changing the future. The only place that we actually have the ability to make any difference is in the present moment. And so the reason why, and that's actually one of the reasons why I think psychedelic medicines and consciousness are the most fascinating, is because when used in a safe environment, which is actually how we developed Apollo, it's the idea of curating safety. As a therapist, we are taught that the single most important thing is to hold space for someone. Holding space means to curate in a completely safe environment where that person feels comfortable being their most vulnerable parts of themselves, allowing the parts of themselves that are ashamed, that are wounded, that are guilty and sad and upset and frightened out when they don't feel comfortable doing that in any other part of their lives.
Yeah.
Right. And that safety in and of itself is healing. And you can do it just by looking somebody in the eye like we're doing right now, and acknowledging that you're listening to them and that they're heard, And so to be able to have a medicine like ketamine, as one example, that is legal right now, that I can, as a practitioner, call a pharmacy after screening you, send it to your home from the pharmacy, and do sessions with you over Zoom when you have treatment-resistant PTSD, and help you have a moment where you can feel safe enough in the comfort of your own home for maybe the first time ever, and be able to go back to living your life through eyes of safety rather than constant fear. That could be one of the coolest things we've ever had access to in the entire history of psychiatry. There is nothing ever come out that, like MDMA and ketamine and psilocybin, that allows people to shift their sense of meaning that dramatically in such a short time, right? Yeah. I mean, it's really incredible.
It can't be understated.
It can't be understated.
Yeah, or overstated, I mean. But
sorry.
I think either way, it makes the same thing. But
yeah,
when people have these, pessimistic views about the world, oh, it's all fucked up. And I'm like, but you're underestimating what's here and on the horizon to here. Right now here, ketamine is just becoming available and people don't really know that much about it. But this is a radical ally, and then you have MDMA and psilocybin right on the horizon of legalization.
Right.
And you can't possibly like count out the power that this could bring to changing the world, because changing the world involves changing the mind, changing the heart of people, allowing people to heal what formerly hasn't been healed. And when people change, the world changes. You can't just change the world, because people will make the world back in the same way that their own mind is oriented. But if you start changing minds at scale, and then all of a sudden the world will change to accommodate that, because we'll make different choices, we'll have different policies, we'll vote in different leaders. Everything starts to evolve, and this is here and happening. And I think people who aren't aware and count out how powerful it is, of course you're pessimistic. But I think this is one of those things that allows me to remain an optimist, because I've seen what it's done for my life and many other people's lives. And I just recognize, like, okay, we have a different, different set of tools that are available now to help reshape the world.
And a different understanding of them, right? We have the ability to do epigenetic testing. We have the ability to do advanced neuroimaging and all this stuff that we just couldn't do before. Like back in the 60s, back when we were originally using psychedelics to study, for example, with LSD in like the 50s, we didn't even know what DNA, we didn't really have a firm grasp on DNA, right? So now we have a very firm grasp on DNA, to the point where we're actually using technology and computers to edit that DNA, right? It's a very different time.
Yeah.
And to think that there may be things that we can edit in our DNA, like the way that certain genes are turned on or off based on experience, like Joe Dispenza talks about, being able to, change the way that you think about yourself through meditation, which actually, through experience itself, is changing the way that our genes are upregulated or downregulated on the stress response side, is basically what Rachel Yehuda showed in the lab at Yale and Sinai through studying Holocaust survivors, and showed that this passes on to future generations. So you make the change in you, or we make the change in us, rather, bring it back to the first person, and then that change not only affects us, it affects everyone around us who experiences and is witness to that change, that transformation, and it affects our offspring and our offspring's offspring, potentially for who knows how many generations, but at least 4 from the animal studies,
right?
Which is really incredible.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
It's a completely new, and this is why it's challenging to integrate into Western medicine to some extent, is because it is truly a paradigm shifting approach to mental health. It looks at mental health from a much more Eastern and tribal medicine model, which is, and well, I shouldn't say that. So it does look at it from that perspective, but it also looks at it from more of an ancient Western Hippocratic perspective of medicine, right? Hippocrates is one of the founders, often looked at as the founder of Western medicine. We all take as doctors the Hippocratic Oath when we're starting our training. And the Hippocratic Oath, the very first part of it is first do no harm, primum non nocere, and followed by many, many other things that are very important about preserving patient rights and making sure that people are autonomous in their own healing process. But the biggest part of that is that the source of the healing, as Hippocrates taught, and as traditional Eastern and tribal medicine practices teach, is that it comes from the individual.
Yeah.
Even in psychotherapy, completely, which is often unfortunately disconnected from the practice of psychiatry, it's taught that if the person doesn't make the decision and the choices to heal themselves, they're not going to get better. We cannot heal them. The role of the healer changes, right? And so if we are, as healers, making our clients or our patients dependent on us for the healing, dependent on a medicine they have to take every day, dependent on the system itself that they see as the source of their healing, it's literally externalizing the healing process outside of themselves, which is disempowering them to do it on their own. So
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It will not work. It will not be sustainable. And the whole point of all this practice, that psychedelics don't start, but they amplify if used properly, is that they, and MAPS teaches about this very, very well by this description of the inner healing intelligence that we all have built in us, this ability for radical self-inquiry and self-acceptance, and that we have the ability by nurturing ourselves to empower our own inner healer. And then when we empower our inner healer through self-acceptance and self-love and self-gratitude and self-forgiveness and self-compassion, like is taught in many different traditions, all of a sudden that inner healer starts to actually heal us.
Yeah.
And then we start to become connected to it in a way where we can show ourselves that we actually do have an ability to self-heal. That is what's going to change the future of all humanity, right, on this earth, because we cannot depend on someone or something outside of us to make us better. It leads to a constant struggle to take more in.
Sure.
Right. And then at the end, what are you left with? You just feel just as empty as you did when you started. And maybe
Or
it was
more empty.
because you've tried
likely.
so much stuff and it hasn't worked. And now you have all these side effects, like you can't have orgasms anymore. And what the hell is the point of that? Right? It defeats the whole purpose.
Totally. You know, it's a lot of people think about, pharmaceutical companies, and they imagine and hypothesize a lot of manipulative people and Machiavellian things. And I don't really ascribe to that. But what I do understand is that any entity that you form starts to take on characteristics. And it is guided by the people in the entity, but the entity itself has a prerogative. And in any entity, especially an entity as big as, a major big pharma, the goal is to generate profits.
Right.
Get as much profits as possible, distribute those profits to the people within the company, to the shareholders. That is its prerogative. And it is very easy to justify and turn a slight blind eye when you're motivated through confirmation bias to see the world and see what you're doing in a positive way, but really not take a look at the true motivation, which is to participate in what this entity wants to do anyways, which is to generate more profits and generate a higher share price, et cetera. The challenge is that these entities are so big and they have their tendrils in so many places. They're the number one donor to politicians. They're the top advertiser on big media. And so
they fund medical education.
Yeah, medical, all of the different things. The tendrils are kind of everywhere. And this is a massive disruptor. This is a disruptive technology to a lot of these different models. So while I don't imagine that there's people out there like, we don't want people to heal, I don't think that's the case.
No, I don't think so either.
But there is inherently some resistance to this. This is not like everybody's be like, fuck, we can just get rid of half of our profile medicines now that these new ones are out. Like, we don't need these things anymore. Like, everybody, you have the power to heal. So we have to recognize that this movement is going to have to come almost grassroots. It's going to have to come from individuals like yourself. And there's many, many, countless doctors I know who are fully on board. But getting this into, and media has actually been pretty generous with it so far, and I've appreciated that. And politicians have kind of stayed out of the way, and so far so good. But I do wonder, at some point I think there's going to be some resistance. Probably already is, and there actually has been for a while. But it's important to note that there are forces that be, without intentional malice, that are going to be opposing some of these different revolutions in psychiatry and mental health and personal empowerment. And so just to be aware that our energy in having these conversations and bringing this awareness and sharing this information is pretty essential for this to really thrive and proliferate in the way that it can.
Absolutely. It is so important, and I'm so glad that it's a pleasure to be here with you, because you've had so many of these conversations with others, and
sure,
like Michael Pollan, and it's just been a big part of you've been a big part of bringing this narrative to the community, right? Which is so critical. And we talked to Tim Ferriss, obviously has done a big part as well,
absolutely.
Huge part. And just by having these vulnerable conversations and talking about your experiences that you've had when you're in these places, it makes it less scary, right? It makes it less new. And then that amygdala fires off just a little bit less, right? And thinking about those changes for pharmaceutical company business executives, right? These people have been trained and have been practicing the same kind of pharmaceutical business for their entire careers. They've been brought up in it. And all of a sudden you're saying, hey guys, we're going to do things totally differently. And it might disrupt your entire financial model. And by the way, you have a lot of shares in this company and your whole financial model might change. So get ready, right? And then their amygdala is like, right?
For sure.
Right. Let's do whatever we can to not let that happen.
Yeah.
And it's not about necessarily malice. It's about a combination of ignorance, which is ignoring the opportunity, ignoring the facts that are in front of us that create opportunities for newness, which is actually something we should embrace rather than push away because it's coming anyway.
Yeah.
Right? It's not, resistance is the root of all suffering, as the Buddhists have said for many thousands of years. But there is a different side of it too that's really interesting. As a primarily addiction psychiatrist, you probably know this already, but the feeling of earning money activates the same part of our brain as doing a line of cocaine, right?
Yeah.
So is it that
Very
surprising?
Scarface.
And on top of that, the ability to earn money and feel like you are gaining something, just like doing a line of cocaine or anything that gives you an immediate high, is an instant gratification process. Right? In nature, other than touch and empathic connection with a loved one, is there any such thing as instant gratification? Or does everything kind of take work?
Yeah.
Everything good really kind of takes a little bit of work.
Sure.
Even getting to those points of having soothing, intimate connections with other human beings requires investing yourself in a relationship and being vulnerable with that person and making sure that person feels safe, or that animal, like a dog or a cat that you want more closer to you in your life, feels safe enough to hug you and be close to you, right? And it's not afraid. That requires work. Everything that's real, that is gratifying and rewarding, that is sustainable, requires a little bit of work. So if you train, going back to Eric Kandel's understanding that practice makes perfect, you give somebody money, you teach them that instant gratification is real. You give them an understanding that that's what society values. And then and then impulsivity breeds impulsivity. Impulsivity literally trains the brain to believe that impulsivity could be a good thing because it gets you more money. And then all of a sudden you're caught in that loop, and that becomes what's familiar to you. So why would you deviate from that if that's where all of the rewards are coming from? It's even though you might internally feel that, hey, what I'm doing may not be having the best impact on the world, right? The rest of society is saying, here's all the money that's saying what you're doing is having an impact on the world and you're getting rewarded for it, right? Like the Sackler family. I mean, look at what these people did. They lied to physicians by selling opiates, telling them that they're not addictive. Many, many doctors and nurses and healthcare providers died because they got addicted to the medicines that were sold by the pharmaceutical companies on top of patients. And now we have this terrible opioid epidemic that the Chinese warned about thousands of years ago was going to happen if we let opiates into our society unregulated in the way that or minimally regulated in the way that we did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's, you think of something like, runner's high. Well, first you got to run to get high, right? Like you can't get runner's high without running.
You have to run a little bit to get comfortable with the discomfort first of running, and then you start to really get the runner's high.
And then but it works, and it will reliably work, and it will reliably improve. Same with cold plunging, same with breath work, same with meditating, same with any of these different things. It will reliably work. The advantage that we have is these quick fixes, these short-term thing, a line of cocaine or continuing to earn money. It fails at a certain point. It fails to be pleasurable. Even opiates, everything fails when you're trying to get these results that you didn't work for in some way, because it's outside of what's actually real and natural. And you can look at all the studies about extrinsic acquisition of different things. It doesn't yield greater happiness. It doesn't, think of all the wealthy, famous people that commit suicide. Like it doesn't fix the problem, nor does continuing to escalate a cocaine habit make you feel better.
Right.
It might have been fun at first. Same with making money.
It
fun
might
at first.
seem like it makes you feel better, but it definitely doesn't. And then the effect gets less and less every time.
Over time. And I think that's the thing that's also like a reason for optimism is everything else is self-defeating. These other things, they will eventually, you cannot continue to feed the hungry ghost and the ghost gets full eventually. It's like, fuck, cocaine did it. Like that was the solution. Or, I just made more money and now I'm happy and now I'm fulfilled and now my life has purpose and meaning. Like it won't ultimately work. So people are, if they're paying attention at all and have the awareness of another model, they'll find the other way because of their suffering. Their suffering will increase to the point where they just can't handle it anymore.
Right.
And they either burn out entirely or they shift course and go another way. And that's to the advantage of this, as Charles Eisenstein would say, this more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. It's what will work sustainably.
Yep, absolutely. If it's not sustainable, really, it's not worth doing. Ultimately, and one of my favorite songs of all time is another brick in the wall The Wall by Pink Floyd.
Yeah,
and that song left such an impact on me. Just hearing it, as I'm sure so many other people have, in the idea that we should be questioning everything we're taught, because just because we're taught it doesn't mean it's right. It's just someone else's description or definition of the way things are. And if we are taught, just because we're taught that instant gratification feels good in the moment, and you're not taught that every shortcut has side effects, right? That every shortcut adds risk to your equation. And if you actually put in the work, you can minimize the side effects, right? As an example, with cocaine activates all these neurotransmitter systems in the brain. Those neurotransmitter systems are very similar to, if not the same as, the neurotransmitter systems that would be activated if somebody gave you a hug that you liked, right? Probably not if you didn't like the person, but if you like the person, then that will activate the same endorphins, the serotonin, the dopamine, the endogenous opioid receptor system, the endocannabinoid system. All of these systems get activated by soothing touch from a loved one. If you alienate all of your loved ones because you've stolen money from them to buy cocaine, or you've reneged on your commitments to other people, and you've built a foundation of distrust because you've been high for so long on whatever drug, it doesn't matter, because you're seeking that instant reward, then you're ultimately suffering the side effects of taking that shortcut that manifests long term. And it's really it's like a manifestation thing that you could literally predict from the moment that you take that first line, or the moment that you can tell where this path goes. It's like kind of like The Matrix. I mean, The Matrix is a brilliant movie, by the way.
Truly.
I mean, those guys really knew what was up.
I think they're gals now. Is that right, Ryan? Oh.
No way.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Learn something new every day. So, but I mean, the idea that the idea that you can do that, and that touch is the natural, that every shortcut that we think of in our lives has its own natural complement that just requires a little bit of work to make it sustainable. Right. And dispelling the myth of instant gratification without risk being a thing is really important for people to understand. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. This is one of the single biggest things we see all the time throughout all mental health care, is helping people understand that, particularly in the addiction world, is that it's not instant gratification. It's instant gratification with X amount of risk.
Yeah.
And it's up to us, if we care enough to think about it, to say, okay, well, how much risk am I actually taking on?
And it's X amount of risk compounding at X,
times
ratio.
time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's going to it's going to escalate.
Always, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
And this actually leads to, one thing that is the caveat for any of these medicines is doing it in the way that, your protocols offer people, really allowing introspection, repatterning, asking the right questions, doing it in kind of a ceremonial yet therapeutic context.
It's like a Western modern ceremony.
Right,
Yeah.
Exactly. This yields reliable, consistent, positive results. But if someone is in a consistent amount of pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, even potentially physical pain caused from inflammation, caused from a poor diet, whatever, ketamine can disassociate you from that pain. And so if you're doing it in this context that we were mentioning prior, the Western ceremonial therapeutic model, it can actually help you reprogram that pain for good. But you can also just take a couple squirts all the time and just kind of numb yourself out. And so you can use ketamine in a way that is actually the antithesis of what its true highest potential really is, because you can use it just the same way that you would use, a bottle of wine or one of these other intoxicants that numb the pain, so to speak. And I think that's, this important caveat to share is that it's not like just because you're using ketamine to do the same thing that alcohol once did, that all of a sudden it's better. I mean, maybe it is for your liver or something like that, but nonetheless, it's still
But
the
less
same.
for your bladder.
Yeah, yeah. It's still the same energy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about addiction also is that, and Carl Hart talks about this from Columbia, who's an amazing addiction researcher who did some of the original research on using ketamine therapeutically to treat cocaine addiction, which is really interesting. And you can use the exact same substance in different ways and get the opposite results, right? The exact same substance used with different, just to phrase it a different way, with different intention can get you completely opposing results. So with the example of ketamine, which is a really important one right now in the space, there are a lot of people who deliver ketamine as an IV administration or an intramuscular injection or as a nasal spray that you take home as a prescription that don't have any psychotherapy associated with it at all. And those people often are the people who can have good results, but they also are the people who are at most risk of escapism through the medicine, using the medicine to escape from their pain, to escape from their suffering. And they're the people who are most likely to have side effects from the use of the medicine in that way because they require usually more doses more frequently and higher doses over time. Because, remember folks, there is no escape, right? There's no escape from this. Like we're all in this together. We're here for when we're here, the time we're here. And we might as well make the most of it because there is no escape. There's only engage. And when you use ketamine with the intention to escape, or any medicine for that matter, you will build tolerance. You will make yourself more likely to disempower your own healing process because you just always find yourself back where you started when the medicine wears off, right?
Right.
And that might be 2 weeks to start with ketamine, but then over time, it could become every 3 days you feel like you need another infusion or you need another, or every day you need another spritz, right? And that is not consistent with the healing process that these medicines represent. The beauty and the miraculousness of these kinds of medicines like ketamine and MDMA and psilocybin is that you can take one dose or a few doses spread out over months, not with continuous use, with the goal of having a time-limited experience of where you take, anywhere, I guess the best way to think about it would be like 3 to 12 doses. Every dose is focused on engaging in your life, engaging in your pain. As the famous Buddhist monk Milarepa said, you put your head in the mouth of the beast. The beast represents your greatest fears. And you say, eat me if you will. And the beast disappears, right? Because it's just you.
Yeah.
And we can all do that at any time. If we run from that beast, if we avoid it, if we try to escape from it, the image of the beast just gets bigger and scarier and the teeth get sharper and more frightening, right? Because we haven't actually just addressed it and faced it head on and said, hey, I know that you're there. I acknowledge you. Just another part of me. I know you're an afraid part of me. Don't worry. You're safe right now. Let's talk it out. Right?
Yeah.
Let's look each other in the eye. Let's putting your head in the mouth of the beast is a nice metaphor, but it's like, let's look each other in the eye. Let's acknowledge each other that we exist, that you're part of me. I'm part of you. And let's figure out a way to get through this together.
Yeah.
Because if I ignore you, you're just going to get really pissed off at me, as if a friend that was trying to get your attention was ignored, and they probably get pretty pissed off at you, right? Or you would at them if you're trying to like, hey, bud, I'm a little uncomfortable right now. I'm a little upset. I'm a little anxious. Like, can we talk? And you're like, nah, right? Get out of here. And after a little while, like, you get pretty annoyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those knocks get louder.
Yeah. You're feeding this phantom monster, and the more that you turn away, the more that the more that you won't look under the bed, the more that there's something terrifying under the bed.
Exactly.
Until like it gets too horrifying to even stand. And there's a couple things I want to talk about is, as an addiction psychiatrist, I'm sure you're the most well-versed on the ways that the addiction mind works, in which there's so many slippery ways that you'll be able to justify something. I'm taking this spritz every day because, my life is super stressful right now. And there's this thing going on and this thing going on. Well, guess what? You will manufacture those stressful things to give you the justification that you need to do the spritz every day. And so the stressful things will never end because you will actually put obstacles in your past so that you can justify you getting your fix of the thing that you're addicted to. Right. And
Absolutely.
that's like this slippery way that the mind works. Like, well, shit, eventually this is going to end, but it's not, because you're going to create the thing that allows you to get your addictive fix.
Isn't it a wonderful paradox of how that's like, because you want to believe that your mind and your body are conspiring to heal you. That's what we're trying to teach people. And then at the same time, people are in a state where, especially if you're addicted to anything that you perceive is going to give you risk-free instant gratification, then, or numbness from your pain or what have you, then your mind is trained to work against you. So how can you trust, right? How can you trust in the healing process when you've already disempowered yourself or you've been disempowered rather, based on what you've been taught, to believe that your body and your mind are going to do whatever they can to get that thing. And that's a very real experience. It is absolutely real. And it is really important that is exactly why I brought up earlier that idea of dispel the myth, right? Recognize that certain things about the way we see the world and the way we've been taught to see the world may not actually be serving us. The idea that instant gratification is real is a fallacy. It does not exist. There is literally no such thing as instant gratification. Yep. Instant gratification is a shortcut to suffering, right? Like, that's how we should reframe it. That's rewriting your narrative, right? And we've all been addicted in the way that you described to stuff. There's, whether it's a video game, or whether it's working out, or whether it's cigarettes, or whether it's making money, or social interactions with certain kinds of people, or whatever it might be. There are always things that we seek in that way. And the goal is that those things should be enriching to our lives, and that we should feel better about ourselves after, and more fulfilled after the experience is over, and feel like we can grow from that experience, not feel more numb or feel more in pain or feel more upset so that we need more stuff to make ourselves feel less upset again, right? Yeah. Like, if that's the cycle, if that's the ride you find yourself on, get off as quickly as you can. Yeah. Right? Which is no easy thing. It's not easy. It's not. That's why we exist. But it is possible. Right? It is possible. And people can do it on their own. They can do it with help. But I think and psychedelic medicines, particularly ones like psilocybin, ketamine, Ibogaine, have a very, very big role to play in helping people reset the brain. Ibogaine that's a big one. That's the one that's most popular for opioid addiction. Yeah. Because Ibogaine is not going to let you out. like in my experience with Ibogaine, I've done it 2 flood doses and then a couple kind of smaller doses of it. But when you're in the flood dose of an Ibogaine, treatment session, and I did it in more of the psychospiritual model, less the medical model with, Wheaty elders. And that must have been an amazing experience. It was unbelievable. And I told that story first on Joe Rogan's Experience. Actually, the painting behind your head was someone who his name's Gorboogie, and he cured his heroin addiction after listening to that podcast on Joe Rogan, using Iboga. Came back, painted that painting, and then I went out and met him at MAPS like years later, and he's like, hey, this painting is up for auction to MAPS, but I want to tell you the story behind it. And I was like, whoa. So of course I bought it. It's amazing. But the thing about it is, and ayahuasca will do this too, is it'll pin you down to your shit where you can't escape it. Right. And that's like, I think, the beauty of some of these medicines, especially ayahuasca and iboga, and psilocybin can do it in certain ways too. But when you have agency, you can squirm. You can squirm around all this stuff. Like, good luck squirming around what iboga is trying to show you. Like, it is just relentless. It's got you for 24 hours. Right, it's like, I got time on my side, baby. It's like that Rolling Stones song, just like, time, and it's just got you. And you're like, fine, I get it. Like, I see it. And it's like, and it's okay. And you get the messages. And I think that's one of the powerful things that Ibogaine can do, is not only does it provide this reset physiologically, but psychologically. You are going to look at the cause
of your addiction, why you're addicted, what's going on, where it's coming from.
Where that shame originates from.
Exactly.
Right?
Where that shame is from, where the shortcuts you've taken, it's going to show it to you until you're just like, I see it. I see it all. I've looked in every different orifice that this shame monster has.
Yeah.
And like, I know it.
And you can't deny it anymore.
And you can't deny it anymore.
Right.
And that's the beautiful aspect of these kind of longer term, really potent medicines. They're not for everybody, obviously, and it can be a very challenging experience, and typically is in both of these. I mean, I can't recall a physically more difficult experience than Iboga.
That's what I've heard.
It's
the most challenging.
It's impossibly physically uncomfortable.
Yeah,
like indescribably physically uncomfortable. I remember the second time. It was so like psychologically illuminating and healing that the way I remembered it was psychologically illuminating and healing. And then I did it the second time and I was like, you got to be kidding me.
I signed up for this?
What did I do? Did I forget? Did I forget the primary sensation, which is absolute misery?
Right.
You know, like moving around 1 inch to another inch to get some bit of relief from the relentless nausea and buzzing in your ears and flush, and your heart rate's at 100 because it's actually a stimulant psychedelic. So you're like just in this fucking thing, listening to the jaw harp at 1,000,000 miles an hour, just because that's the only thing that can calm you down is music that's faster than you're actually racing. And it's this wild, beautiful experience ultimately. And, you know, I think when you look at all of the things, everything has its place, you know, and I think even something like Iboga, I've heard people who can microdose it in such a way that it can become less therapeutic and more like, oh, this is something that's like my new stimulant. Like this is my new Adderall, right? And it's almost impossible to think about something as powerful as Iboga doing that, but it goes to the point that any single thing can be used with the wrong intent to get a result that's not valuable. Now, I haven't particularly heard of ayahuasca being used that way, other than potentially some escapism where people are like, oh, I'm more comfortable in this world than I am in my own physical world. And it can certainly, but I don't hear of like, nobody brings a little bit of ayahuasca to a party or something like that.
Well, not like that. But there are shamanic traditions that do, I think several Amazonian traditions where the shamans microdose like basic, what I mean by that is like sub-threshold. So it's like just at the threshold of awareness that you notice anything, and they will microdose ayahuasca, which is really interesting. Or the components of ayahuasca separately, and then sometimes they'll microdose them mixed together in the brew.
Well, microdosing can be productive, of course.
Right.
You know, and with the right intention. What I would say is I've rarely seen ayahuasca be used for other than malicious intent from the provider, which certainly exists. You know, shamans who take advantage of people under the medicine and take advantage of their agency over those individuals. That's happens. A very real thing.
Yeah.
But like, it's maybe one of the few exceptions to people using it just for pleasure or for instant gratification. It seems to be one of the most resistant to that. And I'm not saying it's not possible. Anything is possible with everything. But I think it is generally a universal rule that any medicine, any drug can be used properly and improperly.
Right.
And ayahuasca just tends to be, I think, the most resistant to that because it just doesn't really work that way.
Yeah. I would agree with you. Although I do know some people who I have had the pleasure of knowing who, you know, will tell you that they've done 300 plus ceremonies in 2 years and they're with ayahuasca and they're still not feeling good. And then you have to have a different conversation, right? Yeah.
Like what are they running from? So ultimately then the rule is universal, that there is no thing out there.
Basically no thing that is not abusable.
Yeah.
Right. And actually that is a great segue because when I went in 2018 to study a little bit with the Shipibo people in Peru and to understand their ayahuasca traditions, because ayahuasca in their tradition has been used to heal trauma. And I'm a trauma psychiatrist. And I was like, I want to see what they're doing, right? How is this similar and different to what we do? And it was very similar in a lot of ways. But one thing that was really, I mean, there were so many fascinating things about what they do, but they even call it trauma, right? What they're working on with the medicine, they they call it trauma, and they have this way of cultivating an experience that is just so it's so safe and so the same kind of safety that we do. It was like so familiar. Do you know what I mean? It's like the same kind of safety that you experience in the best therapy session you've ever had, right? Yeah. And it's just, you feel like any part of you that is guilty or ashamed or vulnerable is not judged. It's just a part of you, and it can come out, and it's allowed to be there just as much as the other parts of you are. And it's safe there just as much as the other parts of you are. And maybe that ego protective survival part that's been driving the bus for so long, it's actually okay for that part to take a back seat for a little while and let the child part of you drive, or let the emotional and empathic, sensitive part of you drive. And the role of the interaction between that curated safe experience and the administration of the medicine in that container, as we call it, safe container, and the songs that come to the shamans who are singing to the participants is really, it's a really incredible thing. I mean, it's something like that is very, it's familiar and foreign at the same time, right? And the experience of that for people is so powerful, to be able to help them just kind of, dislodge some of the stuff that's been stuck for a while.
Really, it's almost like Christ energy in a way. And I say that because the energy of Christ that I've experienced is that you can show your very worst and there won't even be a flinch. Like, not even a flinch. Like, this is my worst. And the Christ energy is like, I love you.
Right. Radical non-judgment.
Radical non-judgment, right? Yeah. And in a way, in the ayahuasca shamans, it's like they've seen like the most intense exorcisms of the darkest thing. And they look at it and they're just going to keep singing their song. And they're not going to judge it. Like, you have the feeling that they can peer inside your energy body, and almost like they have access to all of your darkness because it's on display in your own psyche. And you just have the sense that when they're over you singing their benteadas, that they're very aware of that. Mm-hmm. And they don't flinch. Like, they don't flinch. The song, they're not like, whoa, stay away from this one. Like they don't pattern any of that. And I think that's the same way in the therapeutic model. It's like, whatever's coming up, it's like, it's all good. Like, we've seen it before. We're not going to judge you. And that place of non-judgment is so different than the world, because the world is just judgment everywhere, every single, judging what you look like, what you say, what you did, what you have done. You can get canceled for something you did 20 years ago that you may or may not have done. Like, the world is like, judgment is at almost the peak, right? That I've ever seen it be. And sure, some people have done some bad things, and I'm not saying that people should avoid consequences for these bad things. And some of this is helpful, and some of this is. But nonetheless, like, in our world, there's just judgment everywhere. So to go to a place where there is no judgment, and that doesn't have to be a ceremony, it doesn't have to be a therapy session. In, the Fit for Service fellowship that I lead, we'll go through these vulnerability, and in different men's group circles, you go through these vulnerability things where people hold that type of space without any medicines, well, sometimes breath or something like that. But it's so valuable. It's so valuable, because then as you look at the external world not judging you, or look at the shaman, or look at the, therapist not judging you, then you can learn to not judge yourself. Exactly. And then that changes the whole fucking game.
Yep. That's exactly right. And that is the part that we have control over, right? When you think about what causes anxiety is thinking and spending the limited precious time we have every day thinking about things we don't have control over. Right. And then we feel, which is most things, by the way, and then we feel out of control more of the time, which makes us feel really upset, because we don't like uncertainty, right? We like to know even though we don't know most of what's going on around us, we like to know.
Yeah, we're scrambling to know at all
Right.
costs.
We're trying.
People even create all these fictions about what we think we know just because it's more comfortable. Even if the reality of what we think we know is horrible, we're like, fuck it, I'll take it.
Right.
Because at least I know it. I've watched myself do that.
Yeah, we all do.
I hypothesize this person's not texting me, for whatever length of time. I must have said something, must not like me for whatever reason.
Right.
And then they'll like hit you up and be like, hey man, sorry, I was fucking out this. And you're like, oh God, why didn't I just say like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But instead I created this whole fiction of them not, and now I do that less because I caught myself doing this so many times. I mean, shit, it was so bad.
And you realize it makes you feel like crap, right?
Of
and then you're like,
course.
why am I doing this? But you actually had the thought to question that behavior. There are lots of people who don't. There are lots of people who just assume that is what's happening, right? That this person isn't texting them back because they're upset at them or they said something wrong or what have you. Then the worst thing they do is they send more messages and they're like,
and then all of a sudden they create the reality that they're afraid of.
That's exactly it. You literally manifest the reality.
Yeah.
that you act on, right? And so taking time, the single biggest judge there, as you said, right? The world is full of judgment. The world is full of people judging other people. Our brains are judgment machines. Literally, we're detecting contrast from one thing to another, self and other, table and chair, right? Like air and not air, right? Like we are contrast machines. Like the colors of this thing in front of us is cool, and the shapes because they contrast with each other,
Right.
right? That contrast is literally the beauty of life. You can't get rid of judgment. All you can do is reserve it.
Yeah.
You can say, okay, I acknowledge that this thing's happening, but maybe I can admit that I don't know whether it's good or bad. And then I don't know that I know this person's not texting me back. I don't know whether it's good or bad. Let's give it a little time and see what happens, right? And let's reserve judgment and then allow everything to unfold as it will. That is the fundamental practice of self-compassion or patience that allows everything to keep moving in the way that we want it to. And that is something within our control, right? We can't control what other people think about us. Fundamentally, we can't control what other people think about us. All we can control is what we think about ourselves. So if we can practice that, it's just practice. Practice makes perfect. If you practice thinking about what other people think about you, you get really good at making a lot of mistakes, assuming what other people think about you that you know. And we don't know. We don't know shit about what other people think about us. Usually what people think about us is a reflection of what they think about themselves.
Almost always.
Almost always.
Yeah, we're always just we're a projection. Very few people really see us. They see us as they want to see us, as we fit into their reality tunnel. And you can get closer and closer to gnosis with the person, and that's the intimacy,
right.
Intimacy, right? That's a beautiful thing when you get there, when you feel really seen. It's one of the most beautiful experiences available because then you don't feel alone anymore. But people don't know shit about you. They don't even really see you for the most part. So this person So being mindful of that, just bringing in that awareness to just say like, all right, I don't really know what they're thinking. And they don't really know me either. So just hold it lightly, I think is really like that important thing. And with all this judgment, to reduce it to a simple preference rather than anything, like I don't think we're able to escape preference. I mean, it's a mystical idea of like reducing preference. But ultimately, if your preference is like, yeah, I prefer the chocolate to the vanilla today, and like, I would prefer if this person texted me back today or not, but it's like chocolate, it's like, whatever, I value that. And if you can just make it soft and then honor the fact that you have it rather than pretend that you don't care, which is some form of tricking yourself into spiritual bypass.
It's okay to care.
Exactly, right? Like it's okay to care. Just say like, oh yeah, my preference would have been a different thing, but just hold that lightly, not just build so much on top of it. Just acknowledge your preference and then move on. But there's so many different ways that it can go extreme one way or the other. Either I have no preference and whatever it is supposed to be and blah, 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 I don't care. And then you're just stuffing your true feelings and bypassing them.
Right.
Or you're fabricating some big thing and making it a big deal and then ultimately becomes a big deal, So, but just kind of being like, all right, here it is. It's just hold it loosely, like hold the reins loosely.
Yeah. And there's and on top of that, there's also a lot of there in those kinds of situations, right? Thinking about what other people think about us, we can't possibly know, and we don't have control over, and we don't understand necessarily what they think about us, which is why it causes anxiety, right? And that's why it causes uncertainty. The uncertainty is what causes the anxiety that we feel, the restlessness and the discomfort of not knowing what could be going on. And so we can easily get trapped in that loop. We all do. And then the ultimate fix to that is to remember that, or my favorite fix to that is to remember that, we all have a hell of a lot more in common than we do different. We're all human before we're anything else, right? Literally all of us. And if you want to extend that to animals, we're all alive before we're anything else, right? We all have the same 4-letter DNA before we are anything else. And that's really important because when you think about that, and with respect to animals as well, most of them, but also humans, actually I would say all animals and humans, we all have the same primal urges for survival, right? We all need food, water, air, and shelter, and companionship and connection with others, right? So typically when someone's not texting us back, it's usually because they're trying to fulfill one of those core 5 human needs that we also spend most of our time trying to fulfill.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And so you can pretty much from that basic understanding that we are more similar than we are different, but our brains are contrast generation machines or contrast detection machines that generate beauty out of differences, right? Then you can kind of prevent the mind from going down one of those paths of self-criticism and self-judgment in those kinds of situations and redirect it to a path of, okay, this person's probably busy trying to fulfill their regular daily life needs, and I'll let them do that. And then we'll, if they text me back, it was meant to be. If they don't, it wasn't.
Yeah. Otherwise, and you can also get in a trap. You can become too sensitive to other people's concern about this, right? Like on my phone, I have literally over 1,000 unread text messages, and that's accumulated over time. That's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. I mean,
mine was bad.
I'll get my number here right here. Right now it is at 1,090.
Holy cow.
Right. And fundamentally I can't, but I still sometimes feel compelled to oh fuck, it's this person's thing and this person's thing. Also, by the way, if you have 100 friends, you're going to have 2 birthdays a week. That's unsustainable.
Yeah.
It's absolutely unsustainable. So sometimes you're going to have to say no to the birthday party and no to this is a housewarming thing.
And how do you even remember all those birthdays?
Yeah, exactly. I
so
can
bad
just get
with
fucking
birthdays.
invites, know? And it's really interesting. And I think you have to not get too caught up in worrying about what they're going to perceive about you not showing up, and just say, express as honestly as possible. It's difficult because a lot of times it's yeah, I'll be there, even though you're not. And then that creates this false expectation. And then they do have a genuine gripe about it. But if you just express honestly and honor yourself, people will start to know you, and they'll start to trust you, and they'll start to understand that, all right, Aubrey's just doing the Aubrey thing, and it doesn't mean he doesn't love me, and you're doing your thing, and it doesn't mean you don't love me. And that's not to say that even though I do this same thing and I'm promoting this, that certain people won't hit me back, and I'll be like, fuck, man, I thought we were closer than this, And then of course, inevitably, they do hit me back, and it's all good. But it's just this natural human thing. I would just caution people to, even though we understand that people might be in temporary anxiety about this thing, it's still essential to honor yourself. Just honor yourself, express your truth, give them the gift of the opportunity to do the work to see you as you are, because that'll help them see themselves as they are, and that'll give them permission to say no to the infinite birthdays that come, it just extends. The more people you have, the more events that you're invited to, and you have to get comfortable with, is this right for me? What is my sacred want? What do I really want?
Can't do everything.
And you want friends who want you to do what you want. That's what you want. And if everybody can just get to that place, all that anxiety can just drop, and all right, I'm going to do what I want today, And that doesn't mean that sometimes if someone really needs you, all right, show up, great. Be kind as much as you can.
Yeah.
But really you have to be kind to yourself too.
Absolutely.
And that's essential. And I was just giving myself a nice lecture for myself, of course, which is pretty much the secret of everything that I say. If anybody wants to know why I'm promoting all this, is because I'm talking to myself, everyone. I have not espoused a single bit of wisdom that I'm not actually preaching directly to myself. And this is one of those examples.
We all, I mean, amen, right? We all kind of do that in our own way. Hopefully, most of us, if we're being true to ourselves in our speech, which I would hope we all try to do as much as we can. But yeah, to that point, I think one of the things that we are really missing in our society right now is touch, right? We are missing, especially because of COVID. I mean, we were already not touching each other and ourselves enough before COVID, and then COVID happened. And, speaking of this idea between balancing newness and oldness, or familiarity and unfamiliarity, and this contrast, touch is like one of our most fundamentally important neuroconnective or neurological pathways that sends that safety signal to the brain that says, I'm not under threat right now, right?
Yeah.
I am not running from a lion right now because I have time to pay attention to this feeling of someone touching me nicely.
Right.
And that's really, really important. Or the feeling of me putting my pressure on my own chest, right? Or rubbing the inside of my palm in a nice, soothing way. That is a signal to us that we are in control, that we are in control of how we feel, and we're in control of our own sense of perceived safety, even if we can't necessarily be in control of our global existential safety because we don't know, and it's so confusing and vast. We can at least know that we're in control of how we feel right now in this moment, right? Bringing everything kind of back to the present. And that is and that was really inspirational to me in therapy and learning MDMA assisted psychotherapy from Mike and Annie Mithofer, just taking it full circle, and ketamine assisted psychotherapy from Phil Wolfson, because as a psychiatrist, I know this might surprise a lot of people, but we are taught, and even as therapists, pretty much psychotherapists, we're taught not to touch patients. We don't touch our patients, right? We make eye-to-eye contact with them, and we look at them, we gaze at them lovingly, and we make sure that they feel heard and listened to, but we don't touch them. And yet, when you do the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy training and you do the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy training, touch is a fundamental part. Body work is a fundamental part when somebody is experiencing distress or feeling unsafe, even with the drug on board that's supposed to make them feel extra safe. They can still feel unsafe when they're reliving or going through past traumatic experiences. And we are taught how to physically, of course, with their permission and consent, work with them in a non-sexual, intimate way that helps to soothe them and calm their bodies and and basically center the mind back into the body so that they can be present with their physical whole selves again. And that training was the most inspirational thing that led us to develop Apollo, because not everybody can get psychedelics, right? It's like pregnant women, children, people who are very, very seriously ill, people who have bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, they are not good candidates for psychedelic medicine. And they oftentimes don't have enough people around them touching them in their lives. So you give them something that they can take out into their own lives, like a device that vibrates gently on their body and gives them that sense of feeling like, oh, just like touch, if I can pay attention to this feeling of a soothing vibration right now, I can't possibly be running from a lion.
Right.
And then you center mind back into body, and you can make a decision from a standpoint of strength instead of a standpoint of fear.
And for those people who don't know what the Apollo is it's like, it looks kind of like an Apple Watch, so without a face, something like that. And you put it on,
I can
and
show
it
mine
has
because I wear it all the
time.
time.
And it has these different programs that you can do that are very like soothing in the way that they kind of, it's almost like the vibrations feel almost warm, even though it's not temperature regulated. It's like this warmth of like, here I am, like, I got you.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like what it's saying all the time, like, I got you. Or it's like, hey, like, wake up a little bit. The pulses go a little faster. Like, all right, let's get a little movement going here, buddy. And it becomes this kind of, It's kind of like a beautiful little ally that you can have when you don't have someone to like rub your shoulders and give you a little shake, like, come on, man, let's get it going here. Or
Right.
hey, it's all good. Like settle, like calm down a little bit.
Right. Or if you haven't mastered breath work and you're
Right.
going into a ketamine experience for the first time and you haven't mastered breath work and you're like, I have no idea what's coming. This is really anxiety provoking. My heart rate's going up. And people use this going into those experiences, thinking about the future of the way wearable technology could complement altered state of consciousness healing experiences, especially when we're doing them more remotely. Is this has been an invaluable tool to be able to provide ketamine safely to people at home.
Yeah,
Because
you can't touch
I can't touch them.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
I can't reach through the monitor, but I can, teach them how to use this so that they can activate it on their own.
Mhm.
And it's actually, I think, better than me touching them because they're in
Eh,
control.
questionable.
It's questionable, right? There's benefits of both.
Right.
Benefits of both. But the point is that it has the added benefit of the empowerment factor.
Sure.
Where
They can set the
they're in
program.
control of it at any
Yep.
time.
Mhm.
And that is really important, right? The idea that you're in control of how you feel. The way that even in an experience where your mind is in another universe or another plane, you're still in control of how you feel. That's why we teach breath work,
Yep.
right? That's why we teach self-touch techniques. So it's a really interesting time to think about the future of, what are these experiences going to be like for people? What if technology like this, one of the things that we hope to explore in the future is how could this complement the ability to scale psilocybin and MDMA assisted psychotherapy at home, right? Those therapies cost $8,000 to $14,000 per person to
Yeah.
go through one course. But if you could figure out a way to help people be more empowered and safe in their own skin when they haven't felt safe in their skin in decades, and then to be able to have this experience more easily without going into a clinic and requiring the dozens and dozens and dozens of hours from two therapists and all of this extra prep and sleeping over because they can't stay in their own house and blah, 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 right? Then you gradually check off little ways you can cut costs and make this more accessible to people.
Yeah. For people who are interested in working with you in particular, because this is going to be a question that's going to come up, how would they? Because there's not a lot of people who are doing what you're doing out there. There's clinics that are opening. Some just give you a shot, walk out the room, like, how was it?
Right.
And then there's some
That's
that
like
are
90% of ketamine clinics, by the
that's
way.
mostly what's going on right now. But there's other ones that are developing and working on different models. But I haven't heard of anybody who's doing what you're doing, which is empowering people through utilization of technology, the technology of the Apollo, the technology of Zoom, and these different other formats, being able to guide people through an experience. And if this is appealing to somebody, what can you offer? Is it state-based at this point? And what's your idea for expansion so that you can help bring this out to the world?
So the first answer to the first question is, you can, if you want to find me or access to our type of treatment, you can just go to drdave.io and you can reach out to us through the website and you can learn all about the kind of therapy we do. And we do 10 plus different kinds of psychotherapy. They're from traditional Western to other techniques, to medicine assisted, to technology assisted, to, things without medicine at all. And that's the way to get in touch with us about this kind of stuff. And if we figure out that, we're not the best fit for you, we'll find someone else who can help as well.
Mm-hmm.
So please feel free to reach out. The other side of it is the scaling is really complicated, right? Because these techniques are not that easy to teach, but
Right.
they're also not taught in the traditional programs, and you need clinical experience to be good at them. Like, you need mentorship. And that's one of the biggest things that we've lost it's not lost in medicine, it's just changed, but it's been lost in a lot of other areas of self-development and professions where you don't apprentice anymore, right? There's
Right.
not like an opportunity to apprentice in lots of positions where that would be really useful to get good by learning from the master,
Right.
right? And so, interestingly, thanks to Phil Wolfson teaching me how to do teleketamine assisted psychotherapy with people in their own homes over Zoom, I realized that this was an opportunity to train others to do this too more easily. And so we actually started a training program through a nonprofit that I work with called the Board of Medicine, which is a group of mostly Western medical providers who are world-renowned experts across all different fields, but also Eastern and Tibetan Buddhist experts and nutrition experts, and really trying to bridge the gaps between Eastern and Western medicine, and long-term tribal as well. And the training program is small right now. We have a wait list. It's just starting, but the opportunity is to be able to have us and our team mentor you, where you start out the same way we did when we were learning how to do CBT or psychodynamic psychotherapy, where you join in to a session. You're part of the therapeutic dyad with me or with one of my colleagues, and then you watch, right? And then you do intakes, you screen patients, and then you watch the therapy sessions with medicine and without. And then after you start to get a little more comfortable seeing a few, you participate in them and you talk more. And we always encourage a little bit of participation, but if you really don't know what to say, it's okay. Just watch.
Yeah.
You watch. See, we have this phrase: it's see one, do one, teach one. Right? It's usually a little more than one, but that's how we do it. And so you watch, then you participate, then you lead your own sessions with us doing more of the watching, and then you teach others. And now that we can do it over Zoom, in theory, as long as the clients are cool with it, you could have like 20 people watching, right? You're not going to have them all participate, but if they're okay with it, or if you say, hey, you can have a discount if you allow us or participate for free, if you allow us to teach others how to do this treatment from your work, then it creates this really unique learning opportunity from virtual care that we couldn't easily do before. And so I'm hopeful that in the future, being able to do these techniques virtually will allow us to expand it and scale it much more rapidly. And I hope more, this is not proprietary to us, guys. If anyone else does ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, consider mentoring people and teaching them how to do it, because I can't tell you, I have like 30 people waiting to be mentored into how to do this, and I'm only one guy.
Sure.
We could use other people to help. I don't know if you know Dan Engel, right?
Of course.
I think
we're close brothers for over a decade.
Dan's amazing, and he does ketamine-assisted psychotherapy as well, and also I believe does some mentorship. But it's doing things like that where we remember that teaching others how to do what we know how to do is part of doing what we do.
Absolutely.
It's not just an afterthought. It is a core part of it, because if we, God forbid, get hit by a bus and nobody knows how to do what you do, then what impact did you leave on the world?
Yeah, and some people don't have that model. Some people find a little bit of magic that they have, and they want to keep it all to themselves because of this scarcity mindset that, if I share it, then people won't go to just me. And
I know
this is one of the most disappointing things that I see in the field, is this scramble of the old way of proprietary technologies and music and let's lock everything down and force people to come to us and only us because we're something different and it's not open source. And I just shake my head and say, this is not the way. We're doing, and I use this, obviously this phrase has been used and misused in many ways, but this is doing the work of the divine. Like we're doing God's work here, and the nature of God and all of the abundance of love that's everywhere and the desire for all people to heal, it is not in accord with sheltering medicine and saying only me and only me can do this. Like open source all of this, like all of the different techniques, all of the different ways, and as many people who can do it as possible. Great. And that goes from everything from community building to working with people. Like if you have something that works, share it. Talk about the ways, and trust that the more you do that, the abundance is going to flow back. Like the reciprocity of the universe, it just works.
Yep.
It works. Like the more you give, good luck. Try to give it all away, because you're just going to get it back. And there are some people who are takers, and you have to be mindful that there are going to be occasionally in a relationship or something, you can give, and someone's just going to take this kind of vampiric energy. Have the discretion and boundary if you run across that aberrant person who's not in accord with reciprocity. Limits.
Yeah, set limits. Be like, okay, I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, totally.
But, this is the way that I work. This is the way I do my thing. And if you want to be part of that, you can. But it's going to be a give and take, not just a take.
Yeah, but universally, that law of reciprocity, it runs deep.
It's karma.
Deep,
it literally is karma.
Deeper than we can even possibly fathom, and we can throw words at the way to describe it, but it's just like one of those fundamental laws of the universe. Like you have love, you give love away, guess what? That love's coming right back, and it's coming back instantly. And it's just the nature of reality. All right, there's one more thing I want to talk to you about before we wrap this up,
Do you mind if I add one thing to what you just said?
Yes, please.
So I really appreciate that you brought in the idea of doing divine work in the healing process, because I think that word is not used enough in terms of the way we think about healing. It really is divine and sacred in what it is. And I think that's also at the same time what gets people caught up, because you start thinking as a healer that when you facilitate a radical transformation for someone, that you are therefore the conduit of divinity itself.
Yeah.
Right. And that is what starts to set the ego on this path that leads people to make really bad choices that are ego-driven, scarcity survival choices like what you were just talking about, rather than the choices to share and to enrich the community. And so the way that I like to think about it is that what we're actually doing is we're facilitating the ability for our clients, or the people we work with, the people who seek to be healed, to nurture their own personal connection to the divine. And that is intuition, right? So that foundation of self-trust that we build based on what the Shipibo people describe as the 4 pillars of self-gratitude, self-forgiveness, self-compassion, and self-love, they support by nurturing and practicing those emotional skill sets. Just like working out in the gym, you build and strengthen the foundation that are the 4 pillars support, which is trust in myself. And then that trust in myself is my connection to the divine that we all have access to, right?
Yeah.
Like, I am not the Lord Jesus Christ. We all have the ability to access Christ-like experiences because he's part of all of us, as is everything in the world around us. So by remembering that we all have that ability to connect to the divine and then share that with others, it also helps to remind us of how interconnected we really are, and that this is not something that's unique to me because I went to medical school and I'm the healer. I had these transformative psychedelic experiences and I'm the one who's going to heal you. It's not about that. It's not about you.
And the great healers all will say that, whether it's Borangi, who's an amazing medicine man that I work with, who does this really unique kind of somatic bodywork release technique that I've been apprenticing with. Ultimately, he finishes that and he's like, I didn't do anything. I just surrendered to what needed to be done. And it's almost as you give up, even though what my experience was, Borangi just did some magical shit. And he's like, no, I didn't. The magical shit came through me, but it's not mine. And, I was just there as a conduit. And it's this humility that
in fact, it's yours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like you working with, the mystery, capital M mystery, combined to create this process. And I was in some way just a facilitator, just a bridge, just that chakaruna, to use the Quechua word, to bridge you to your potential healing that's available. And,
beautiful thing.
Yeah. And it's the idea of the hollow bone. And it's, I recently sat with an ayahuasca shaman and, we're in the closing circle, the candles are lit after the experience. And it was mind blowing what he channeled through all of his music. And, and he goes, well, what happened? I'm just here now. Like I was gone for a while. I was just, he was just absolutely in the flow, and the music that was playing was being played through him. And he was like, and then his personality is back online and he's smiling like, what happened? How was it? Even though he knows he was there, but nonetheless, he's giving it all back. He's giving it all back to the ayahuasca herself, to all the guides, all the helpers, to you who did the work. Like he's just always giving it back away. And in that way, it prevents you from getting this inflation of, I did this and I have this. No. You just got out of the way more.
Right.
Like, you're just getting out of the way of what's possible for everybody. Such a beautiful model to always remember.
And that allows us to see the healing process clearly, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're looking at healing and you're trying to heal people, but you're looking through a lens of your own ego all the time, then it's not a clear lens. You're not getting a clear view. You're getting a distorted view, right? You're getting a view that is completely clouded by your insecurities and your sense of self that is fractured and probably wounded and needs a little bit of more attention, right? And that's okay, but we should also acknowledge that that's happening and do that work and make sure that we don't inflict ourselves on others, because then that leads to that cycle of the instant gratification cycle again, right?
Yeah.
Whereas going back to what you just said a second ago, which was really eloquent, is this idea that you give love and gratitude, I feel like, are the most underappreciated things in science, but also one of the best human superpowers, because they are sustainable, they are free, and they give back almost instantaneously. Almost, right? You show gratitude, you show love, and you get it back relatively quickly, not always in the ways that you would expect, but it comes back. That is a positive feedback loop of joyfulness and happiness and things that can be shifted and molded in a way that is like really fundamentally empowering, right? It shows you that you can put out positive energy in the world. That was actually one of the most fundamentally important things that happened to me in my own life, was that going back to the bullying in school thing, right? I had been picked on by other kids in school. I thought that while that was happening, that's how kids were supposed to treat each other, right? And so I went home and I picked up my brother. I had never done that before, really. And that started a cycle, and then a feeling, just being able to feel in control by having somebody lower than me that I could push around, right? Yeah. Which is me inflicting my insecurities on someone else or many other people. And
which the bullies probably had happen to their older brothers or their older kids or their father or whoever that was.
Exactly. And so recognizing, there was one point in my life that it was around, I want to say, I can't remember the exact time frame, but because it all just kind of blends together, but it was around sometime in like high school, maybe freshman year of high school, because it was a transition period where I had an opportunity to go to another place where I didn't know the same kids. And I had an opportunity to make new friends. And I was like, I wonder what happens if I just start being nice to people. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, what if I don't spend all of my time thinking about what other people think about me and expressing like overconfidence and trying to present a version of myself that's not true to who I am, that's like this tough guy or like what XYZ, whatever. But regardless, not a version of myself that was true to me, and not be nasty to people or not be mean to people, try to make them feel badly about themselves. But what if I was just nice, just friendly, gracious, thankful, and loving? And let's see how that goes, because this is not making me feel good right now. The current thing that I'm doing, this just isn't making me feel that good. I don't feel like happy at the end of the day when I get home. I feel like I want to douse myself in video games for 3 hours, right?
Right.
So I tried it. And what is better about life than the experimentation process, right? You try it, you see what happens, and what happens? I tried it, and people started being nice to me back. And I was like, oh my God, I found it. I found
the secret.
Yeah. And there was a moment where I'm like, holy shit, why didn't I think about this earlier? But that quickly faded because I realized that I had found it now, right? Yeah. And you find it now, and you find it when you find it. Everybody's on their own journey. Everybody finds what they're supposed to find at whatever time. And I just started doing it, and it literally changed the entire course of my life, because it allowed me to actually build meaningful friendships with people, which were not just based on making each other feel like shit. It was about making each other feel good and feel strong and feel rewarded by being together, right? Not feel like you're together because you don't have anyone else to hang out with.
Yeah. And interesting about being nice is it requires a genuineness, right? Because nice can be a strategy.
Sure.
And I fell into this trap where I would be really nice to the girls that I liked. So nice that it wasn't even me. Usually I'm kind of a jokester, and I'm like, with my buddies, we're all cracking jokes and we're playing around and we're palling around, and I have nothing I'm trying to get from them. I don't want them to like me back in any way. I'm just being me. And so I had a lot of male friends, but then there was always the girl all through until I was about 21 when I kind of figured this out. But I would be so nice that it wasn't even me. It was me playing a strategy of trying to be in this way. And all of them were repulsed by that in a certain way, because it wasn't authentic. They could sense the strategy.
Women know.
Of me being nice, right? Yeah. But then there would always be the girl that I wasn't that fixated on, but they were more like a buddy, and I would treat them honestly, and I'm a nice person, so I'm genuinely
Right.
nice, you know. But they would like me, and I would end up dating them. Like, well, this one likes me, and I didn't figure out it was like, oh, that one likes me not because they like me because I'm being real.
Right.
I'm being real and allowing the real niceness to come. But if there's a way to make a joke, I still make the joke. You know, we still laugh, we still pal around, we still have fun in that way. And then I finally got it. And I was like, oh man, like just be yourself.
Yep.
You know, like be yourself. And if you are a nice person, allow yourself to be nice, but don't try to be more nice than you are because you think that's a strategy that'll work, because people will pick up on that shit.
Right. And nice isn't, and you bring up a great point, right? Nice isn't necessarily the best word to describe it. It's really gracious, right? It's like we all strive to live a life of grace, of free-flowing smoothness, right? Like Bruce Lee, you when water is in a cup, it becomes the cup. When water is in a stream, it becomes a stream. It's not in the stream and then thinking about how it used to be in a cup, right? It's like it's not like that, you know? And so that's true grace. Can we ever get to the point of water? Maybe
Good
not.
ideal though.
Yeah, but it's a good thing to live up to, right? And the fastest way to grace is to practice gratitude, just like exercising in the gym, right? It's just we weren't taught that you can exercise emotional muscles. So if you really think about it in a tangible way, it's I am using my skill of gratitude to express graciousness towards others, and then I feel gratitude back, and then I get that much closer to being graceful, right? And the same with love. And the same with compassion, and the same with forgiveness. And they all form positive feedback loops that feed back on each other in a constructive way that facilitates growth rather than a way that facilitates us feeling kind of lost and empty at the end of the day.
Right.
Right. And even if you don't know where the path is going, it at least helps you get a little bit closer to finding it and you know, guides you on your way.
Yeah.
And helps and entices people, most importantly, entices people around you to be more likely to support you on your path and not take you away from it. Being devious attracts devious people, right? Just like impulsivity attracts impulsivity.
Right.
It's not, and trains for it. It's not that much of a mystery. So you want the people around you that that are emblematic of the way you want to be as a human being. If you are insecure in yourself and you're going out trying to meet people, you're going to attract insecure people.
Yeah.
And if you are secure and confident and thoughtful and gracious, you will attract those kinds of people. So thinking about who we want to be around us is really important as a self-reflection of who we want ourselves to be, because that's what radiates out into the world.
Yeah. Your vibe attracts your tribe.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so I want to talk about this topic because, and this is not a recommendation, and I put this out as a caveat, but in my own personal experimentation process, ketamine and cannabis have a very interesting pairing that I find to be incredibly valuable from just a healing standpoint, from an exploration of my own consciousness standpoint. And these are, in most places now, cannabis is legal, and in all places actually, ketamine is legal. It's something that I think is not talked about that much, and I don't know why that interplay and why that interaction is so potent, but it really is. And there's something I think it's because the cannabis really awakens this somatic awareness. And so when you enter into what can feel like a completely dissociated void state that the ketamine can often bring you to, the body's coming with you in an interesting way. And then the body is communicating with this other access to the quantum, if you will. And what can happen in that pairing has been really, really interesting for me. So I was just wondering if you've, heard about this, experienced it, or if anybody's looking into this particular combination.
So it's definitely a thing of interest.
Yeah.
Phil Wolfson, who's, I think he just turned 80, I think. He is he's been doing this for a really long time because he was one of the original psychedelic psychiatrists. Mm-hmm. And is a huge fan of the combination. When we say cannabis, people often get confused, right? Because cannabis has like 200 plus cannabinoids in it. So we're really talking like THC
yeah.
and ketamine. And he's a big fan of this combination. I think that the tricky part of it is dosing, right? Because cannabis is a tricky creature.
It's tricky because it can be the most challenging psychedelic experience or it can be the most fun.
Right.
and it can be both.
And cannabis is actually a psychedelic. People don't talk about it that way, but it really is. And it's just a matter of dose, right? Like the Parisians used to have their hashish parties and they would talk about like tripping for hours and hours on hash brownies after dinner, you know, and that was those are psychedelic experiences. And the reason why I brought up the Shipibo people in earlier was because they have this really interesting way of thinking about these plants and chemicals and everything that we put into our bodies or interact with, which is that everything is a spirit. Doesn't matter whether you believe it or whether you see it or acknowledge it on a regular basis, everything has a spirit. Everything that is a thing in this world has a spirit. Those spirits have different sides of them just like we do. So cannabis has a light side and a dark side. The dark side they call the shaitana, and the light side, the name's escaping me, but they all have those things. And depending on how you interact with the medicine, it will impact which light and dark parts of that medicine or that thing you're interacting with come to the surface and express themselves more. So the way they believe it, which I think probably makes a lot of sense, is that if you use something respectfully, like if you use cannabis intentionally and you use it, you know, with an intention to access a specific part of your consciousness within the ketamine experience, and you take the time to investigate how much you should take and get the dosage right so you don't go into like a paranoid spiral of upset on discomfort, right? That feels like it's last days. Right?
When is this ever going to end?
And you're like, clawing at the walls, like
for sure.
can't move because of the ketamine, right? And like this is a real thing that happens to people because they haven't taken the time to figure out how to use the medicine respectfully, and that time is respect. Putting in the time to figure out how to use something properly is respect, and it's a way of showing respect. And so there is absolutely use for these. It definitely has not been studied well. I don't know any publications that have really looked at it, but in the clinical world, especially where cannabis is legal, there are people who will use THC to deepen the ketamine experience in different ways. And it's really quite interesting. And on another note, with cannabis, people will use CBD, high quality, of course, CBD, that's pure and doesn't have any contaminants in it, and CBDA, which is the acidic, more anti-inflammatory form of CBD, to calm and reduce the dissociative effects of ketamine and psychedelics when people are having a little too much. And so there's different ways that the cannabinoid system, the in our bodies, our endocannabinoid system can be modulated very carefully if we take the time to understand it, to actually really curate the ideal healing experience for someone based on what we as the healers know about them. As I see it, like that's the container that we're creating. Right? Somebody comes to us, and if we say, if I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a Western trained psychiatrist, somebody comes to me as a patient, says, I'm suffering, I've tried Prozac and Zoloft and all these other, Western prescription medicines, and they're like, Doc, I need help with something different. I'm like, well, have you tried this other Western prescription medicine? Right? They've already completely lost faith in that. How is that helping them? They often usually need intensive talk therapy and time to come off of prescription medicine that they feel hasn't been managing their symptoms well, to reorient with themselves and get familiar with who they are unmedicated, and then have the opportunity to be in a safe container where we can explore other legal alternatives like ketamine and cannabis therapies, and cannabis and ketamine therapies potentially mixed together, and see where those go. But it's a really exciting time to be able to start to explore that.
Yeah, I agree. And interestingly, one of the most profound psychedelic experiences of my entire life happened fairly recently. And I would experiment with a little bit, just a little puff of, cannabis flower and then a ketamine journey. And it always deepened the experience and also helped with the integration. And I found a lot of benefits, but the big, most profound journey happened when my wife was given a bottle of CBD from a friend. And I'm used to CBD isolate, where it's not full spectrum. There's no THC.
Yeah.
But a lot of the CBD out there has like 0.3% or something like that, like a small amount of THC. And so if you take like the regular tincture, you're getting very little, almost like sub-noticeable amount. But for whatever reason, I was used to, Dr. Dan Engel talks about higher dose CBD and doing that every once in a while. And I was like, fuck it, I'll go for a high dose tonight. And thinking that it was CBD isolate. Well, it wasn't. And this was like 10 o'clock at night. And I had just unscrewed it. Instead of taking the dropper, I just take a swig out of the bottle. All right. And then we're watching a movie. And we're in a hotel in Sedona. We're watching a movie. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to like massage the fascia in my face. And I'm like, wow. And I was like, oh no, I'm high. I just got high and I'm going to just get more high. And she's like falling asleep. And I'm like, babe, I'm getting really high. She's like, oh, really?
That's nice.
That's nice. And then she falls asleep. I'm like, fuck, like I'm getting really high. And I also had some ketamine troches there. And I was like, all right, well, look, I know what this really high experience is like and it's feeling pretty good, but I'm going to take a troche with it to see what happens. All right. So troche dissolves in my mouth. And the combination of, and I have to give credit to the other cannabinoids that were in the CBD. That's the way I ingested it in this time. And I haven't duplicated the experiment. But the troche and the full spectrum CBD, all of a sudden, it almost like knocked off whatever regulates muscle control. And I was going through the most potent fascial reconstruction self-massage I've ever experienced in my life. It was like my whole body.
While you were touching your face?
Without touching. Like
wow.
Things would like systems of fascia would fire and stretch and pull like behind my ears, behind my eyes, places that I have no conscious control over would just happen. And it was like everything in my whole structure was realigning. And at the same time, as the instrument got relieved of its tension, like just pure wisdom was coming through, wisdom about non-judgment, particularly, really like understanding the nature of it. And it was such amazing. A beautiful experience that happened, kind of on accident, really, at that point. And it's, again, this is not a recommendation. I'm not saying like people, hey, everybody go out and do this. Don't listen to me. I'm just sharing my own experience with it. But it led me to believe that there's amazing promise in exploring this combination. We're still on the frontier of understanding each one of these individually. Like what is the highest use of, cannabis and THC? What is the highest use of ketamine? And so no hurry, but ultimately, as an expert in many of these different things, I thought I would just share that and venture that as just one of those kind of blinking asterisks that I have, because I've done pretty much every psychedelic medicine out there, but I would rank this as one of my top 5 journeys. And it's
pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there as this evolves and, fractals out and studies get, we're still learning about each of the compounds individually, but in combination, I'm curious what that would yield if kind of wielded with a little bit more curation.
For sure. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I think we learn more from personal accounts of these kinds of this variety than anything else, because you can kind of imagine someone can imagine themselves in your shoes in that setting. I think that while ketamine is anesthetic and dissociative in that it creates this phenomenon of kind of separating our mind from our body a little bit, and then of course reconnecting it after it's over. Sure. Cannabis, especially THC, can create this interesting, and especially THC of the sativa variety, can create this interesting experience where you become more aware of tension in your body.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people who have this all the time, which is why they only smoke certain strains or ingest certain strains of cannabis in certain situations, because they're like, I don't want to be aware of my tension. Like, I know I'm tense, right? If I can't do anything about it, why would I do this to myself?
Right. And I'm kind of that way too.
Right.
You know, I wasn't trying to get high. I wasn't looking forward to the experience that I was about to have, because it generally makes me so aware. And then I can do something manually, like roll out on a ball, do some yoga, and that'll help relieve it. But I have to relieve it.
Right.
But then for whatever reason, the ketamine allowed that intelligence in my body to surpass, like to override whatever thing that made me feel like I couldn't control, like I couldn't make my scalp move back without flexing muscles. It was just happening. Like the way that the fascia was turning off and on was on full automatic pilot to such a degree that I was just like, whoa, like the body is so infinitely wise and intelligent and miraculous of what it's capable of if we can just kind of take a back seat. And I think it was the ketamine that allowed that part of my mind to take the back seat so that the cannabis would say, oh, cool, I get the wheel.
Right.
Oh, we're going to fix all this shit. You know, like I'm not just going to show you what's tense. I'm going to fix it.
That's incredible.
You know, and that was just that mind-blowing experience. I'm getting chills now thinking about it. It was just, and that speaks to also what we've been talking about is you have one of those and you recognize how intelligent the body is.
Right.
Like, fuck, like we are divine incarnate. Like it's in there. It's like the potential beyond what we'd ever even imagined is possible. And that was one of those things where you just can't forget it after that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting experiment that you did on yourself.
I know, right?
But I mean, to be able to have that kind of experience, it's an incredible teaching moment, right?
Yeah.
You also were the lucky in that you went into it relatively unintentionally and still had a very powerful healing experience from it. And yet I think a lot of that probably had to do with the way that you embraced the experience. You went into it not necessarily, I could be wrong, but not necessarily like judging it and like, oh man, I fucked up. Well, I'm high right now. And like, now I'm just going to get, take this other medicine that will hopefully make me less high. And you weren't like escaping any part of the experience. Right. It sounds like you kind of dove into it and tried to make the most of what it was based on what was going on. And that approach, I think likely is what set you up, literally putting your head into the mouth of the beast, right? You're setting yourself up, recognizing that you don't have anything to be afraid of in this moment. It's just you, and anything that comes up is you. The tension is just you. If it's there and you're aware of it, it probably wants to be let out in some way.
Yeah.
And it does speak to this incredible ability of the body to heal itself. And we're part of the most disruptive nature of trauma, which we've all had, especially after this year, is the idea, and by trauma I mean just like bad stuff that happens, right? Not things that cause PTSD, but just bad stuff happening. Stress, can't stop stress from happening. It's going to happen.
Sure.
And one of the most difficult parts of that is thinking that we don't have, or that it teaches that we don't have, that there's something conspiring against us, right? Why me? Right? That's another narrative. Like, why did this happen to me? What is wrong with me that this happens to me and not to anybody else? Well, guess what? It happens to everyone else. It's a little different for everyone, right? And so there's nothing wrong with you. It's quite the opposite, that the universe is actually conspiring with you to try to help you along the way and along your path. And these different things that happen are not personal. It's just ways to create more opportunities for growth. Every challenge, everything that happens that comes at us that's stressful is just another opportunity for growth. That's something that we have control over, right? We can change at any moment from the mindset of, why is this happening to me? What's wrong with me? To, I'm grateful for this opportunity to grow and become stronger and better at being me.
Yeah.
Right.
Amen. Well, I told you at the start of this podcast that you said most people call me Dr. Dave. And I said, I'm not going to call you Dr. Dave until I receive therapy from you. And today on this podcast, I received therapy. So thank you, Dr. Dave.
It's my pleasure.
For offering this. You mentioned your website, and if people want to buy Apollo, if they're interested in what we talked about with that, what's the best place to do that?
ApolloNeuro.com. APOLLONEURO.com, or ApolloNeuroscience.com also works. And you can check us out on socials. If anybody's on Twitter or Instagram, you can hit me up at Dave Rabin on Twitter. I always struggle to remember these. And at Dr. David Rabin on Instagram.
Yeah.
It's always good to hear from people because, we need more human contact in our lives. And Clubhouse. Clubhouse is, I don't know if you've been on Clubhouse, but
I haven't.
It's really fun because
I've heard that.
Especially during COVID. I don't know if we started the Psychedelic Clubhouse and the Psychedelic News Hour to help educate people on these conversations and this material so that we can decrease the stigma and the anxiety around psychedelics a little bit in the community. And it's been working, it seems. And it makes you feel, when not every app can also be used for, feeling bad and feeling good as well, right? But I think when used intentionally, just keyword there, that it really makes it allows us to feel connected and together, like you're sitting in a living room having like a conversation like we used to back more often before COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
And during COVID, it was a game changer because I felt like we were having I'd be having conversations with people like Rick Doblin and Rachel Yehuda and Jamie Wheel, and then other people would come up and be like, "Oh, I heard you're talking to Jamie Wheel. I want to join this conversation." Then Jim Fadiman's in there, right? And then and so it's like a psychedelic salon that used to happen back in the day that doesn't really happen as much anymore because we're so far apart. And at the same time, it reminds us of the miraculous power that you feel and the goodness that you feel just simply by feeling together and feeling connected together with other people who also recognize that even though they're world famous people and they have, done world changing things, and maybe others of us haven't done that much stuff of that kind yet, that we're all still just human. Right? We all have that in common, and that's more important than literally everything else.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. Dave. That was a pleasure. Thank you, Ryan Giles.
Thanks, Ryan.
Love everybody.
Thanks, Aubrey.
See you next week.
Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.